meeting to order, and we'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, we have primary agenda tonight is the presentation of the Board of Selectmen's 2020-2021 budget. I'm not sure how you prepared to do it, but I'll let you do that. I would ask one thing before we start, though. I think a great majority of us have watched either the Board of Selectmen meetings or been through the materials or watched some of the workshop. So I would ask that in presenting your budget, you focus on the major drivers, the items where the Board of Selectmen in particular had differences or recommendations different than the town manager, and the rationalization or justification or the compelling reason for the decisions that both of you made, so that we can effectively try to get to the game, as they say, and discuss, where we are relative to our original guidance, the long and very important process you've been through with department heads and requests for improvements, one cut by the town manager and then by the Board of Selectmen, and then on our desks. All right, fair enough?
Absolutely.
All right, great, thanks.
Thanks for having us here tonight. I'd like to recognize Sean Askham, Jackie Bados, and Wendy Max-Dudas from the Board of Selectmen, who are here with us. Do we have anybody on the phone from the Board of Selectmen?
Yes, two, Kevin and Derek.
Oh, I'm sorry, the Board of Selectmen. I
Oh,
just want
sorry.
to make sure
That's
I'm
not us.
recognizing my colleagues. Okay, good. So, Rob, I was going to handle tonight much in the way that you suggested. In fact, I was going to even go a little bit further off script, which I'll get to in just a moment. I wasn't anticipating beginning this way, but I did want to share with you and with anybody watching that yesterday the town manager signed an emergency declaration that gives our chief executive greater flexibility and leeway in order to make decisions to cope with the current public health threat. You may have also heard that the governor has given municipalities greater flexibility in extending their budget deadlines, which is something the Board of Selectmen is going to be discussing on Monday, and I would anticipate that we would do that. And I'm not sure that we will need the additional time, but I see no downside in having that additional time. I wanted to begin by sharing some context on this budget that you might not have been privy to, but just coming out of our last meeting when we sent this to you. This budget, I'm starting on slide 5, just to make it clear that we are coming in significantly above your guidance on the operating budget and significantly below your guidance on the mill rate. And you may know that this budget didn't pass the Board of Selectmen unanimously. I don't want to speak for my other colleagues, but my understanding from the conversation is that even those who voted against it really agree with the thrust of this budget, but some members wanted to spend more time making cuts ahead of time in order to get closer to your guidance. My perspective was that a lot has changed since November in terms of some of the assumptions that were made, especially the increase in our grand list, which was a pleasant surprise. So in realizing that had changed, I personally wanted this board's guidance on the cuts that we needed to make, whether the goal was really around operating or whether the goal was more around keeping the mill rate in check, or both. But then, obviously, in the last 72 hours, even more has changed. And that's why there's a few slides I can cover in this presentation that I think are germane. I feel like it would be, frankly, tone deaf for me to walk through this presentation, make the case right now for the 4 service changes that we're recommending. I still believe they're absolutely necessary, but I think that I would recommend that we have a higher level conversation right now where we, with the new information that we have, knowing that it's still a developing situation, just get some further guidance from your board about what we know now. Is the guidance that you gave us up there still relevant? I know that Amy put together some very preliminary analysis looking at how the town may be impacted from a cost and revenue standpoint because of the coronavirus. She could present that when you'd like her to. But I just wanted to begin with that conversation and see how you'd like to start.
Appreciate that. Just a question first, is there a slide deck or?
We have a deck that I am prepared to
But it
walk through.
wasn't shared with us. You're going to present the slides? Okay, all right.
But you will share.
I mean, you will share it with, I just,
Yes.
I sometimes don't always open all the emails. Anyway, that's fine. So I think that's a great way to proceed, so let's,
Okay, should we begin with Amy? Or would you like me to walk through a few slides?
so actually, I think it would be beneficial to at least recap how we got to the budget that was approved by the Board of Selectmen. That's sort of the step that brings us here tonight,
Sure.
all right?
Okay. So you can see that the Board of Selectmen approved an operating budget a little under, come back, Art, we're still going.
I thought that was going to be a conversation.
Not yet, not yet. The Board of Selectmen approved an operating budget that was a little under $24 million. It's an operating budget increase of about 6.7%. And as I said, on your mill rate guidance, we exceeded that in a good way. We were short. We were lower, but we were above your guidance on operating.
Just go back to that one real quick.
Yep.
One more. So you're saying your Board of Selectmen approved budget is a 1.19% increase in the mill
In the mill rate, and that's inclusive of what the Board of Education is recommended.
rate? Okay.
Eric, is that using the 6.5 pension investment?
No, good question. That's using the updated, hi, Chris, the updated mortality tables and the 6.625 assumption. Our board honestly did not have a lot of discussion around that because we know at the end of the day that that is a policy call that this board will make. I don't think it's our recommendation is not inconsistent with what our staff and actuaries have shared with us, that they want to see us making progress toward the 6.5, but we don't necessarily have to get there this year.
Okay.
We're recommending 4 service changes. Again, this was prior to coronavirus.
This is in addition to your 6.69% increase.
No, this is inclusive.
Oh, okay.
So this is
Sorry,
a
sorry.
step from the town manager's proposed budget
All right, all right.
to the
Yeah.
Board of Selectmen approved budget.
Yeah, these were in addition to her budget.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. The first is having enhanced assessor inspection services. So when we're closing a permit, let's say on a pool, having someone with assessor expertise go out, and that way we're able to capture the additional revenue in the grand list. That's a position that would be $25,000 a year, and it's anticipated that it would make up for itself multiple folds. So in my mind, this is a no-brainer and would pay for itself.
Should we ask questions as we go along?
Yeah, why not?
Okay. So is this a full-time position? This is a contracted job? Is this a part-time position? Which is it?
That's what contractor.
Contracted, okay. Thank you.
And the only thing, I'll just comment on that, normally I'd be all in on this, and I still might be for it, but just getting emails and seeing emails from local businesses and even some residents who work in the contract service or other things, they're feeling tight with money. Is this the year you want to go on and say, oh, you owe more money?
Yeah.
So that's a consideration that I'll ask you to consider if
Yeah.
we send it back. Is this the year to do it? Ordinarily, 100% in. I think it's a very wise move.
And I also, Lisa, to that point, I want to be clear to any resident.
Sorry about that.
No problem. I just want to be clear to any resident who's watching that this is the budget that the Board of Selectmen recommended last week. A lot has changed since last week.
I will say, though, that these are for improvements to one's property. So it's when you buy a new car, you get an updated tax bill. When you improve your house, you should be getting an updated tax bill. We're not going out and re-inspecting existing properties. That's the revale process. This would be you add a porch to your home, you increase the value.
So now for the audits that Francine was doing?
Oh, that's personal property audits, it's
Okay.
something different.
This is different, This is you pull a permit and you are improving your property. This is a gap that we have in the budget side that we thought when we were serving together was already filled in. That this is tax money that the town of Simsbury is owed that is not getting collected.
So we haven't in the past routinely done that? Like when somebody
Not
builds
to
an
the scope.
addition to their house, if they don't come knocking on our door and say, hey, you should tax me more, we don't?
We catch it and rebound. This is proposing we accelerate the catching to when it's
That's all.
perfected.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions on this one? Okay. The second is a parks facility maintenance technician. So this is a person who would be a jack of many trades, would be doing carpentry and basic maintenance, among other things. You know, really the case behind this one is that the town has expanded its open space, they've expanded their parks footprint, and in that time, we've actually contracted that department. That department is smaller. This is really a position that we feel is needed in order to adequately care for the assets that we have at the level that our residents expect. And if you had further questions, I know Tom could speak passionately and articulately about why he feels this position is necessary, but it's something that I think is very much needed.
So this is one full-time equivalent,
Yes.
and that's the all-in cost for salary, benefit, pension, everything. All right. Is-
Thomas, are we going to be reviewing these back again, or is this the only time we're going to be talking about them?
If you have something to add, I would add it.
Well, I don't want us to pass by the opportunity here to have a deeper narrative. If this is the only time we're going to talk about this position, then let's have a
Go for
narrative
it.
about it now.
Go for it.
So why don't you, please, because we're not,
This is a service restoration. It's not necessarily a service improvement. We lost 2 positions back in the early 2000s that were not backfilled. In that time, as Eric said, we've added the new Flower Bridge Park. The bridge became more active. We've added the meadows, Ethel Walker Woods. We've continued to add without adding the staff to support those needs. And our youth sports organizations, their demands have grown over time as well, so we're out there lining fields more, we're mowing more often. This is a position we need in order just to meet what we're doing right now. It's not something to further enhance our needs for 5 years down the road. I think you guys see our guys are doing a great job now. We have a lot of guys who have been here a long time. We're continually down a person due to vacation time or leave. So we're already working below what we have as our full-time equivalents at this point. We're just asking for this to help us keep up. I'll come back in 3 or 4 years and ask you for something for other things down the road.
Okay, fair enough. Just so you know, just because we ask questions doesn't mean we're not for it.
I understand.
All right,
I understand.
but we haven't had the benefit of some of the detail you've had.
I'm going to do an unusual thing for me and amplify what Tom said, because I've seen statistics in past years when when I was on talking with the Parks and Recs people, we did have a recreation committee before, and comparing to other towns, and I know we've gotten worse since then, the percentage of our town budget spent on parks and recreation is minuscule compared to other towns.
Very low. In addition, I'll add that our Parks and Open Space Master Plan that you funded and is nearing completion is going to identify a need for 2 to 3 additional staff members. That report will be out hopefully in April or early May. But that's, we can't wait longer if I'm asking for your help now.
yeah, I've been holding that's what I wanted to make sure, 2 things I wanted to make sure came out. And I'm speaking to this because of being the liaison, so maybe I know or think I know 2 more data points. One being, I just don't want to lose sight of the fact that the FTE complement was reduced significantly, 2000.
Mid-2000s, it was 2 retirements that were filled back.
And then the justification filled them back was probably very solid. There was no doubt that why we didn't bring them back was just at that time. But considering all the investment that this group up here has made and committed to the town, we have to stay in front of that. And the second point is that, but the first point again is that those FTEs have not been added back with the added requirements for servicing to the town. And second is that I know that study is going to come back and talk about all the wonderful things that the town has and you guys have been a part of. And it's going to say we are so sorely needed in repairing and maintaining so many things that some of them are to the point of being a hazard issue. And this is the kind of asset that would allow us to start to knock off some of the things in those lists, so.
So there's two more questions from me. One, did you consider for that amount of money two people at a lower level? Or how did we get to $96,000 a year professional?
Those are, I mean, Maria can speak better to it than I can. Those are union positions. I'm not sure if we could do that at a lower, at a lower level. That position is, that position that we're identifying is an equivalent to our mechanics position, our parks mechanic.
So this is subject to collective
would be,
bargaining and
yes.
also goes into one of our pension plans?
This plan, this particular bargaining group, they would be in the DC plan. That particular group, the DB plan is closed to them. But it still would be pension, health insurance, leaves that they would be eligible for, disability insurance and things like that.
And the salary associated with this is only about $55,000, the rest is benefits.
55,000 base salary
Yeah.
to 96,000. Thank you.
So it's closed to pension though?
He said, no.
This particular position is in a bargaining group that the DC plan is the only available plan to new hires.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You said you had a second question.
No, that, she answered, that was whether were they, which pension plan they were in. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Of all the service changes, I think the next one is the highest priority of the Board of Selectmen. We did take the opportunity at our meeting to rank them, and this one just comes down to public safety, which is why we put it as number one. It would be a reorganization to the administration of the police department with the upgrade of the sergeant position to a lieutenant position at a cost of a little under $5,000, and then the creation of a deputy chief position. And I wouldn't dare speak to this one as articulately as I know our chief will. So I just, with your permission, I wanted to see if I could
Yes, please.
turn the floor over to him. Thanks.
Thank you. So the main purpose for the reorganization is really to improve the oversight, supervision, and the productivity of the entire department. And I've got a few bullet points here that I'll just address. We really need to provide some consistency and increase our supervision, and not with particular officers, but across the divisions and the functions and all of our shifts. We need to reduce, and this will help us reduce the current workload on individual administrators, which will result in more productivity. And I gave an example last weekend about, we bought this software called the Guardian Tracking, which is just a way to keep track of personnel items, the good, the bad, evaluations, positive comments, negative comments, counseling, things like that. We bought that almost a year ago, and it's not up and fully running right now because it just keeps getting pushed back. And it's really a simple process to do, but things keep coming up. And what we're going through this week is a prime example of that. We've done coronavirus for over a week now, and that's really what we're focused on. So everything gets pushed back. It will increase the available time for coaching, mentoring, teaching, and involvement. So, what I have found over the years is it's really important to be able to have the time to spend with every employee to develop their skills. So it's not a matter of just how to take fingerprints. It's a matter of going much deeper than that and really involving the actual employee and not just the skill that's needed. It will increase the available time for administrators to get out in the community. So the three of us right now, me and the two lieutenants, never get out in the community. And I think it's one of the most important things in order for the community to develop trust in the entire department and to develop the legitimacy, keep that legitimacy of the department, is for us to get out there.
We already trust you.
We have to keep that trust. And we have a duty officer status, and this is, one of the administrators is assigned a week at a time to be the person responsible for emergency notifications. So if something out of the ordinary happens, that person gets notified after regular work hours. And so, for example, Lieutenant Sifo has shared that position primarily with me for the last 10 years. So every other week, he has been on call. He gets phone calls at all hours of the night. He doesn't put in for pay for that. Weekends, he makes himself available. He adjusts his entire life. So adding 2 more people to that will split that up a little bit and will leave that stress that is just sitting there on your shoulders, and for him in particular, for the last 10 years. And not that he needs it, but the department needs that release of that stress.
Reduce overtime, you said?
I'm sorry?
He's being charged overtime, so we'll see a reduction
No,
there?
he's not. He's doing this because
Oh, I thought you had
Because
just
he's,
said.
no, because he's Fred Sifo. Yeah, otherwise, I mean, he's in the union and he could be requesting, the compensation for it. So right now, we don't have a dedicated social media administrator except for me, and I've done it since 2008, and it really shouldn't be resting with me. We joined CALIA, the national accreditation, in 2008, and that is an administrative and management tool that is a lot of work for the administration. A lot of reports that are due on a quarterly basis, on an annual basis. And since then, we have not increased the number of administrators to do those. In fact, we haven't increased the number of administrators in over 25 years since I've been here. So we need to adjust to that. There's a lot more state mandates and requirements, pursuit reporting, use of force reporting, all these things now that take on a lot more time. If we were to have any digital evidence from in-car cameras or in the future for body cameras, that has to be released in a certain amount of time. We can't rely on a patrol officer to do that. They have to be out in the street. So we need an administrator to be able to do that. And it takes time. It takes time to do that. We have not had a dedicated person to do crimes analysis. So when we have our rash of entries into cars or mailboxes that are smashed, we throw the pins up, and each time something like this comes along, we say, why don't you handle this time? Instead of proactively looking at this, keeping track of a true crimes analysis on a regular basis, this will allow us to have somebody to do that. And then there's just projects, the projects that just get put back. We need to take a look at our directive system. It's fairly updated, but it needs to be updated.
Directory system?
Our directive system. All of our orders are directives on how to do things. They need to be looked at. So we signed on for state accreditation in 2003 and CALIA in 2008. And we really can increase our commitment to that, because what it is it's best practices. And it's not that we've been going along with the flow, we've been trying to keep up with the changes. And right now, CALIA may say, we have to make this change within 1 year of this certain date. Well, we should make that change as quickly as possible. And like everything else, it sort of gets put to the back, and then we sort of scramble at the last minute to get it done. Our radio system is a prime example of how we had to put things to the side so we could get this taken care of. Lieutenant Sifo and Melissa Appleby worked very hard on that project, but things had to be put to the side in order to do that. Anytime we replace equipment, and you'll see in our CNR, there's a request to replace our mobile data terminals in our cars and to replace our AFIS machine, our fingerprint system. And it's not a matter of just getting this product in and plopping it in. There's a whole process for hooking it up, making sure it works well with everything else, working with other state agencies, other town departments to make sure this all works together, and then the whole training program and implementing it. It takes time. And then we have always new procedures from the court or from our particular field that we have to implement, and it takes time. Another reason to do this is really to flatten the organization. So right now it's kind of straight up and down. Everybody just reports up. Flattening out the organization will make it much more adaptable, and will also create more of a level playing field for the lieutenants. I think that will cause a much greater exchange of information.
So can I stop you there? So you're saying you would eliminate a layer of management?
No, so right now, if you look at it sort of...
To me, flattening the organization
Doesn't feel to me
is...
like it's a flattening. It
Right.
seems like there's another layer of,
With the deputy chief,
Supervision.
yes, but with the lieutenants, it will flatten out, because right now there are 2, and I wish I had a diagram to show you, but everybody feeds up to the 2 lieutenants, and then it feeds up to the chief. And with 3 lieutenants, you really disperse a lot of that.
Okay, so you're not adding a layer, just adding a person to a layer.
Right, that's the flattening part, yeah.
There is a layer though, the deputy chief is a layer above.
Is a new layer, so that's actually not
That is an
flattening,
added-
that's
Which
the
would
opposite.
have a lot of the
flattening.
responsibilities that I have right now. And really, one of the purposes of this is sort of meeting the next thing is improving our succession plan. So right now, it's not the greatest succession plan, and not as far as replacement of me, but of preparing everybody for the next step up. And we can look ahead to 2-3 years down the line. We may lose all of the administrators except for me at this point. And what do we have for sergeants who are trained, who are qualified for those positions? We have some fantastic people. They don't have the experience to take command of a large division, of a section. Right now, they're part of that. So promoting another lieutenant up to that will give that opportunity, as well as a deputy chief will give that opportunity within the organization. So it allows for the development of members at various different levels. It's planning for the next event. It will reduce a learning curve for anybody moving up into a position. I do expect, within the next couple of years, some significant movement within the organization. And then just greater opportunities for training. So in my field, there are certain classes that you can't go to unless you're at a certain rank, and this will open up some opportunities for more of our members. This model that I'm suggesting mimics the models of other, what I consider very successful agencies, and I know that we do this as a town. We compare ourselves to other communities and what they're doing. So communities such as South Windsor, Farmington, Bloomfield, Berlin, Southington, and Glastonbury all have this same similar structure. They may call something a little bit different, but they have the same similar structure. And then again, this is a structure that has been vetted out and approved last year by the police commission, this year by the police commission, and then approved by obviously the town manager and the board of selectmen.
Yeah, that's an important point. This didn't come out of the woodwork 3 weeks ago. This was again driven by the chief and the police commission last year. We had some debate on it and it didn't get included, and then we had some additional information, additional discussion, and the board of selectmen agreed unanimously, I believe, that this was our top priority. And again, in the interest of full disclosure, this is phase one. The deputy chief is the highest priority right now. In a couple of years, don't know exactly when, we're going to need to ask for more officers as well, as policing continues to evolve, as this community's needs are changing. So we want to be very transparent with you guys, much like we were with Rex, that this is step one. But we believe that this is the step that makes the most sense to go first.
Yeah, please.
Thanks, Chief. Your presentation gets into all sorts of duties, responsibilities, work by the department. And I'd like to bring all that up to a level above, getting at some of the points that Sean just raised. There are two models, and I think I see where you're going, but I want to hear it from you. One model in any security operation, military or police, is that the chief in charge of that operation ought to be as close to all those functions, the people, projects, processes that you just enumerated, in order to offer not only direction, but also oversight. In other words, the leader who is fully engaged in all those operating details is the one who is best prepared to correct them, to change them, to see where it's going. The other is the captain of the ship model, that you need a chief executive officer, or an executive officer, as it's called in the Navy. The executive officer, the departments report to that person. Ultimately, the captain is responsible, but having somebody to whom all those functions respond allows the captain to figure out where the ship is going, where it should be going. What are the strategies it faces? What gaps are there to test for weaknesses, to test for strengths, to deal with the community? Now, at the macro level, the town looks to you for the strategic direction. And I guess what I would like to know is, why would having what effect on your office, on you and the way you do your job, would having a deputy, what difference would it make? How would it affect your job? How would the town be better off with a deputy fulfilling those responsibilities and allowing you to do what you need to do? That's the case I'd like to hear from you.
So today's a pretty good example. I spent my entire morning with meetings on the coronavirus, and leaving the department to run and perform all of its functions, with me basically absentee from that information. So I need somebody to be able to run that. I need somebody to be able to have that oversight. There are tons of meetings, tons of events that I don't get to go to because I would be absent from here quite a bit. And we obviously learn from our colleagues, we learn from other agencies. To be able to attend those things, whether it's regionally here or statewide, is very important. Simsbury needs a flag in places. We need to be able to speak on behalf of the community and not just from an overall standpoint from the first selectman, but also from law enforcement. And the more I'm being pulled from here, the less opportunities I have, or a captain or an executive officer may have to be that close to the organization. So I need somebody to be that close to the organization. Right now it's me, and it's very difficult. So I'm doing policy at the same time as I'm trying to do sort of the head of the department. And people want to see me, and it's very difficult to be able to get all that stuff done. It's just not enough time for that. And the more I push on the existing structure, the more that gets pushed away, to be put to the side, to be addressed only when it needs to be.
So this would allow you to offer greater leadership, greater community involvement, and a greater sense of where to take the department as it faces future challenges. That's what I'm hearing you say.
You said it very well. Yes.
I want to be sure you say it well. That's what you said, isn't it?
Yes. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have one.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've had a chance to do that, but I asked for crime statistics. You used to in your presentations present those. And I have what is in the CAFR goes through 2019, those statistics. And one of the things that strikes me, so I would just need the most recent if you have it, I don't know if you do, but it doesn't look like crime is up a lot if you do it over the years, but total incidents are up quite a bit. And the question is, what's that discrepancy? What's going on
What's
there?
an
Can you walk
incident?
us through that?
Sure. So, you knock on some wood around you, but the crime stats have remained basically level, which is a good thing. And I think there is some influence that a police department has on that. I think there definitely is. But I also think that it speaks more so to the community and the relationship with the community and the respect that the community has for law enforcement, for law in general, and for the cooperative nature of what we're doing. So those calls have remained about the same. And I'll address the calls for service number increase in a second. What continues to grow every year, and we haven't really figured out a way to show this with our current system, but anecdotally I can tell you that the time that's required for each one of those calls significantly increases every single year. So the demand for the amount of service that's being provided, and I'll give you an example. A fraud investigation. So in 2015, we had a big spike in fraud investigations, and I believe that was the IRS fraud that was out there. And so in years past, it might have been just taking a report and leaving it at that. Well, there were so many victims, we had some changes in the way that we could investigate. A 30-minute case then turned into an hour or an hour and a half case. We're able to do more, we're able to track more things down. With our advances in technology, not just our advances, but unfortunately how the criminals use technology, those cases, not just fraud cases, but these cases take a whole lot more time. And even on simple medical calls, we had a slight increase and then a little dip, and now we're back up for the medical calls. But the service that we're providing on those gets longer and longer. We're making sure that we are doing as much as we possibly can until we're pulled from there. So that's the difference between the 2015 statutes all the way, or numbers all the way through now, is the time for many of those calls takes a lot more. So our number of accidents has remained about the same, but that report changed several years ago from a 2-page report to a 12 to 15-page report. So the average accident report right now will take 30 to 35 minutes out on the scene for a normal one car, either no injury or very little injury, to then 30 to 45 minutes to write that up back at the station, where it didn't take that years ago. So the reason our call for service numbers is up, because we have a very active group out right now who are documenting patrol checks. So a significant number of those calls for service are documented patrol checks. So the function on patrol is you should have a good amount of sort of free time where you're actually driving around, you're checking buildings, you're checking out locations, you're being visible, you're looking for things that are out of the ordinary. And what the officers are doing is, we get calls like, well, we asked you to check this, did you check it? Now we're documenting that. Instead of just saying, yeah, we checked that, we're able to document that, and that creates an incident number. So we have a ton of what we call either patrol checks or pass checks. So pass checks are what we implemented starting last year and then full-blown this year during the school. We're doing a minimum of checking every single school every day, and that's getting out of the car, that's going to the playground, that's going inside, that's hanging out in the parking lot. We're documenting those now instead of just driving through. So that's why our numbers are so much higher.
So it's more about how you're documenting as opposed
right.
to.
It's a combination, more so about how we're documenting, but then also about the different level of service that we're now providing. Because we weren't spending nearly as much time at those schools. We weren't spending nearly as much time at the library, at these certain places that are asking for more service from us. And now we're documenting that to show that we're
So
actually.
you'll have a better true up going forward, is what I'm hearing.
Well, yeah.
I had a question too. This may be a total figment of my imagination, but I could swear that I read something in the newspaper recently, maybe it was when you got some accreditation. There was an article about that, I think, and they mentioned, as I'm recalling it, which could be wrong, that we had the second lowest crime statistics in the state, second to Greenwich. Am I remembering that correctly?
I don't know if it was second. I mean, we're obviously very low, compared to other communities, which is something that we all should be
Grateful for.
Yeah, very grateful and very proud of.
Yeah.
I think that it doesn't take much for a community to change their view of a police department, to change their view of town administration, to change their view on really anything. It doesn't take much. So I think we need to make sure that we are not falling too far behind, so that if something happens, that public opinion doesn't change, of whether we're not trained adequately, we don't have enough personnel to respond adequately, we're not visible enough. We need to keep up with that. I don't know if we are number 2 or not, but I'd say we're pretty close.
From a statistical standpoint, we are pretty damn low in terms
We are.
of officers per thousand. Though most of our peers that the chief rattled off have more officers for their population than we do. So we do run a comparatively lean department.
Yeah, so we are about 1.5 to 1.6 is our ratio of police officers per 1,000 residents. And we've gone over this a couple different times, but our comparable agencies are 1.8. The state of Connecticut is 1.8. Our region is 1.8, nationally 1.9. So we're considered.
But you've got urban areas in there too.
It's the mix.
Totally different
It's
crime.
everything. Totally different. It's everything. But I would argue that the level of service that we provide here to an individual and the type of service is very different than the level of service to an urban or an area where there may be more crime. So the level is very different, and I think that is really what makes our police department what it is, and that is what contributes to making this town what this town is, why people want to live here, why people want to work here, because we have that ability. We're not going to a call and quickly scooting out to go to another one. We have the ability to look at what are the problems here, what are the issues, what can we do? It's really a lot of quality of life. In order to get our number up to compare, we would need 44 officers. Right now we have 38, so that's an additional 6 officers, just to be at the comparable.
And we're not asking for that obviously today, but just that, again, it is important for the context.
There's a spoiler alert for the next couple of minutes. Just take a second here to ask if Kevin or Derek had any questions for the chief.
Kevin, Yeah, no, I really don't either. I just, if you'd give me just a couple seconds, and it's a little spotty on the audio, but going back really quickly to the first selectman's, comments about things changing real time, that's, I 100% agree. Especially with this coronavirus, I think the dominoes have yet to kind of fall, all of them anyway. I would say that, at the end of the day, people are going to lose their jobs. There's going to be an increase in unemployment claims, and this is really a time where people are doing more with less. Sidebar, I'm just not sure if it's been the Board of Finance's guidance to either the Board of Selectmen or Board of Ed to manage to a mill rate. I think that's our purview, and I'm really focusing on the increase of 6.7%. Having said that, where I really won't compromise, especially at a time where there's more economic instability, at a time where people may end up deciding on things for either the benefit of their family or otherwise to think unreasonably, that I would rely even more heavily on the people who serve and protect us. So I'm in support of of the additional staffing for the chief, and less so for additional either staffing for lawn mowing or public space. So those are my comments.
Kevin?
Did I say something funny? Because I'd be happy to be challenged on what I said.
Just the lawn mowing.
Oh, okay.
It's a lot more than lawn mowing, but that's okay.
All right, Kevin, you're all right? Are you on mute?
I have no questions. The only question, really, it's more of a comment. It's really towards her. Just because we have positive revenues doesn't mean we have to necessarily spend expenses. And that's really my only comment.
Agreed.
Okay. We'll give you guys a chance when we get around to the end. We're just trying to move through the presentation here.
You
So
have comments to that comment?
If I could just jump on though, Derek, we're not trying to do your job on the mill rate, but during the tri-board meeting, you did talk about both the target for the boards and your goal of a 2% mill rate, which is the only reason we even discussed it tonight. We're not trying to do your job for you, but you guys did reference both the numbers, and that overall you were trying to get to keep the tax rate to 2% or less. So.
we'll have plenty of time to
Yeah,
talk
no,
about that.
I appreciate that. I would, that's point well taken, Sean. Thank you. I like the pants too. I wanted them.
Thank you. It is my favorite day of the year. So despite the world
I
events.
am watching.
All right.
Yeah.
Can I add just a little bit of the narrative? I was bumbling and fumbling through trying to create a visual in my mind about the this is all, he's facing administrivia. We all facing administrivia. I spent 9 out of the 10 hours today talking about COVID impacting our business, my people, planning, everything. And a lot of it was, frankly, we were in a better place than I thought we'd be, because for the last 5 years we've been doing disaster recovery planning, and that was administrative to me. It frustrated me because it wasn't driving revenue, which is what I'm about. But, so I was looking the other day asking for the chief, and so he could say, well, this report takes longer or whichever, and to me was subjective, and I trusted him. But Lisa, you certainly have been in a leadership position over the last, so let's say, current time. So I was looking for something that didn't exist 10 years ago, but maybe existed today. And if you can think about it, the Narcan, the usage of Narcan now is something I don't think existed. When did it come on?
March 2015.
Okay, so under your stewardship and a number of people here, that word sort of came into the common lexicon. And so what did it do? It added a layer of service that the police department had to provide. So with that, and probably each year, comes an increasing level of accountability and administrivia that comes with managing the product, using the product, and training on the product. So those are the kinds of things that I see is that we're only going to be challenged more and more in the future as more legislation and administration is placed upon us to get things right, whether they're new things or old things. And so that was something that I thought was very helpful. And that takes, whether you're discharging it, you have to reload it, you have to store it correctly, training on it and all that. And it's something that is very, I think it's objective as far as how much is taken off of task of what we think of as conventional policing on a day-to-day visual basis.
Okay, can we,
Absolutely.
thank you, Chief, appreciate that very much.
Okay, so when I began, I threw out my script because of what's happening in the news. And I didn't preface the budget as I should have, which is I really believe this is a maintenance budget. This is not looking at, ooh, we got 2.6% increase in grand list, let's see how we can spend it. This is really about maintaining the level of service that we already have, and in some cases even catching up with some of these service changes. And that's really the way that I see it. I think reasonable people may be able to challenge us a little bit on some of these items, but this is a maintenance budget, and I really want our residents to understand that. The final item is around library materials. A number of years ago, during a past financial crisis, that $20,000 was cut from the library. These are things that go directly into the patrons' hands in circulation. And funding our library is a partnership between the Friends of the Library and our taxpayers. And this is, again, a service restoration that had been previously cut in difficult financial times. Is there anything that staff wanted to add on this item?
I think that covers it well.
Oh, I've got some. Please don't take Lisa's absence to mean that this is not important. We were trying to keep the number of folks on the road down. She very much wanted to be here.
Yes, she did.
Besides which, Chris has signed up to champion.
Yeah, I want to, because, and certainly kind of going back, I don't want this to be a sense of stolen valor, because there are certainly people in this room, in this board, who are far more emotionally invested in the library than I have ever been. But I thought it goes back to why you keep on using the word narrative, but I wanted to pull out some numbers just to speak on behalf of Lisa and the group, and also some stuff that helps me visualize one. So we think about the per capita spending, so if you write these down, it might help. So for our peer sampling, we always sort of use this, I don't need to repeat who our peers are, but we constantly compete with our peers. So our per capita is 6.41. Which is the lowest of our peer town samples. Avon spends $9.37 at the highest end. So we're at 6.41. Each of the towns has been raising their number incrementally over the last couple of years. We have not raised our materials investments since 2008, which was when you folks, or some folks here, invested heavily in the library itself and expanded the library itself. So we made a decision to invest heavily in the building. We're not filling it. So 2008 was the last time you increased the materials budget. The use of digital content is up 23% year over year. And the cost of digital content is about 2 times that of books. So so as we go through, go into the future, we're going to be using more and more types of varying, even unknown types of content in the future. So yeah, I think we truly need to build in for that. The one other thing I think is super interesting is that in light of what's going on, currently, we closed our library on Saturday, and the shelves got emptied. And because of that, the digital download content, which we don't even know yet because the numbers are too new, is likely has skyrocketed. So it just goes again to the fact that we have these needs coming in front of us, and we're not supporting them in the back end. So I think it's super important to realize that we haven't done this since 2008, while our peers have been doing it each year, and we are the lowest investor from a material standpoint. Yet the library is one of our crown jewels.
Maria, I have a question. Sure. These items, very compelling cases, did not rise to the level of importance for you to include in your budget, and I just wanted to give you an opportunity to speak to that.
Sure, sure. So I wouldn't say that they didn't rise to a level of importance. I was doing my best when preparing the manager's budget to work with the Board of Finance guidance, and we knew going in it was going to be relatively challenging. I think our preliminary estimates that our fixed costs were going to be around 3.3%. Our fixed costs came in slightly higher than that, 3.5%. So there was no way for us to meet that target unless we started making service reductions. So I did my best to advance a budget that would just be to maintain current services, to not necessarily do restorations, but just to bare bones to maintain what we had. So again, that came in at about 3.5%, which again was a little bit above our estimate of about 3.3 very early on in the budget process of what those fixed costs were going to look like. I do ask departments to provide me service restorations, service enhancements that they think would be important to advance our mission. I can get more than 24. That's been my experience out of here. We have a lot of needs. And so I take all of those needs and really try to evaluate, okay, from an organization perspective, if we had additional funds available, what are the maybe 1, 2, 3, 4 items that I think are most important when comparing all of our organizational needs. So looking at that comprehensive list, for me, these were the 4 service improvements that I thought if we were able to make an additional investment in our community, these are the 4 for me that I felt were most important, but also understanding that already I was coming in at, a full percentage or so more than what the Board of Finance was looking at. But again, I felt that it was important to at least prioritize those service changes, service restorations, and at least present that information, because I don't want, the board to think that there isn't a need. We do have additional need, and those were the 4 that just rose to the top.
So that's sort of the interesting conversation we always have about if you do zero-based budgeting, you would start with what are your primary needs and then build. But if you start with maintain current services, you may end up with different budgets. So I guess I'm driving at, if you were zero-based budgeting, would these be in your budget? And would something else have dropped?
I take an approach of, again, trying to maintain current services, but then also looking at priorities of the board and allocating resources accordingly. And I was not hearing a message of reduced services. So again, the budget I presented was to maintain services, but not reduce services. And to also try our best to structure services that were important in supporting the overall goals of the board.
But when you say maintain services, you mean positions and stuff? Because to me, the chief's position is important to maintain public safety. So the question is, what were the priorities? But it didn't rise to a level that you felt you needed that. So that I'm just trying to really get at why it didn't get in your budget, trying to understand it beyond, I just left everything as it is.
If I can jump in, I think Maria's stuck between your board and our board, honestly, on this one, and I think Maria did her job very well here, and I think she followed the letter of your instruction as well as ours. But as we've gotten our cadence of a town manager here, these rose to, it's a policy discussion for the Board of Selectmen. We've asked to be directly involved in these types of decisions and to do it collaboratively. This is how we've chosen to operate. So Maria did present them to us. I don't necessarily get fixated on whether it was in the 3.5 or not. It rose above the line for Maria to bring forward to us, which is what we've asked her to do, as far as what does this town need to be run effectively in the way we all expect. At least is, again, how I view it. You're right, Lisa, it wasn't in the budget book, but it was as part of the presentation, as if it was in the budget book. So what other way to say it, I guess. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so, and exactly. And so, again, I mean, we have an incredibly, in my opinion, lean organization. And so in order to fund a deputy chief position, that means maybe we're reducing a librarian. And if we're reducing perhaps a librarian who's doing public service hours, that's impacting library hours. So any addition of another position really would have been a reduction of other positions. And again, I was not hearing from a policy perspective that there was a desire to, reduce other positions, change hours of operation in our buildings. And so again, the budget that I advanced, I felt was responsible in maintaining our existing services.
And then the Board of Selectmen, had they have felt that you were spending too much, had it within your policy considerations to say, boy, we really need this position. I'm not comfortable with the expenditure. Do we need these other positions? So that's when that discussion would have occurred. Is that what I'm hearing?
Within a policy context, absolutely.
And to be clear, no one on the Board of Selectmen at this point, I think I'm pretty comfortable saying this, was interested in reducing any FTEs. in any of the departments, because that would be a reduction in service. We all agreed that essentially we're talking about the road and drainage account here, or the salt supply, or if there was anything, or the library's material. We're not talking about reducing people. It would be the stuff we put on the ground and fix our roads with, if we were going to reduce anything.
So can I ask you a follow-up question, Sean? Because I understand you voted, if I'm understanding how it was characterized, you voted against forwarding this budget to us because you felt the Board of Selectmen ought to make cuts. So what, before, identify where the cuts could come from before you sent it to us, so where would you identify them?
It was a philosophical decision. I offered several along the way, and again, I just cited, there's basically two accounts to go to.
So I think that's what
we can fight over the road and drainage account.
What were the several that you would offer? Because that's, you're asking us now to weigh, do we do the chief or not? And maybe I'm getting ahead of where we should be.
Well, we are a little bit, but this is really,
Can I define my yes vote? Because I do something I want to add.
Yeah, sure.
No,
Usually I get in here and you guys kick my ass for asking for too much.
well, there's still time.
Surprised you're after me for no.
I'm not criticizing the no. I'm asking what suggestions you have.
I
'Cause you know
made
this
several
budget-
during the budget hearing, and I just suggested that, in my experience, it's road and drainage, it's salt,
Okay.
it's construction equipment, it's materials, and again, that's a discussion that we can go back and forth and round, and we could spend 4 hours, and then you guys we're gonna have the same conversation we're having right now, even if we did that exercise. So if the board chose to skip this step and come to
No,
here
that's helpful. I
and
appreciate
not
that.
waste everyone's time like we've done in the past. Is the honest answer.
As I said a few minutes ago, I see this budget as maintaining the level of service and maintaining the assets that we have. So my feeling is if we're going to go back and make some cuts, then I want to have a larger, longer-term conversation about saying if we are unwilling or unable to fund the assets that we have, how do we reduce that footprint so we can get on a more sustainable path? And I don't want to start defining up here what that could look like, but as my colleague Sean likes to say, we're here for basically health and safety, number one, and most of the other stuff we do is nice to have. And I think that we need to have a longer-term conversation about reducing that footprint if we can't afford to adequately fund that footprint.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
On that uplifting note, I could go into the budget drivers. So this slide and the next slide actually really illustrates what is driving that 6+% increase in the operating budget, starting with contractual salary increases. And the number I wanted to highlight here is the $44,000. That's the impact that the minimum wage increase is having across all departments. Debt service, up about 11%.
Yeah, and can I interrupt you there? Because
Sure.
I saw that also in Maria's note. It said an increase of 11.14%. But when you go to tab 3, the last page, debt service, it says went up 4.67%. So I'm just confused by the difference in the numbers.
So the debt service that is showing in the budget book, we included the teacher's retirement last year, included with debt, just because there just wasn't any other place to put it, and we don't have that this year. So it's showing as a reduction, but our debt payments actually went up $548,000.
Okay, all right, thank you.
And the final item is ultimately a call that your board will make, but around the pension OPEB increase, specifically reducing the interest rate assumption from 6 3/4, not going all the way to 6.5, so we could model out what that would look like in terms of the mill rate a little later if you wanted to do that. But I think that this slide actually provides a really nice view of what's driving the 6.69%. About half of that are around assumptions meeting our pension obligations.
Pensions are expensive.
What's the acronym again? I'm sorry. OPEB.
Other post-employment benefits. That's like health,
Got
retiree.
it. No, it's just the acronym.
Yeah.
Make them tell you. Always ask.
Any other questions here before I move on? And again, this is just visualizing the various options. The board originally was looking at the assumption that we would go down to 6.5%. and ultimately felt more comfortable with the 6.625. But again, this budget passed 3-2, so there was some disagreement.
So this is Derek. Oh, good, okay, I pressed mute. Basically global interest rates are like 0 or negative now, so I just wonder where in the market we're achieving a 6.5% interest rate. Never mind the 6.751. I think the guidance was to take 25 BIP increments or decreases actually to the 6.5 over a 2-year period. So I appreciate the effort, but I think that it's more important now than ever to get that to 6.5. So whether you do that this year or next year, or if the inclination is to go 1/8 of a point at a time, I guess. I would just caution we're treading even downward further, such that 1/8 of a point will be kind of a blip when it comes to potentially where interest rates and returns are next year.
Yeah, Derek, and we don't disagree, but as you can see, the challenge is it adds $1 million to the town budget. And that was, again, the attempt in the discussion is how do we feather that in? You go to the whole million? Do you just do the mortality tables? Again, were we moving? Again, thought it was an important conversation to have with you guys, because we could go 6 ways to Sunday on this one.
So the mortality table update, once we do that once, will it
Unless it
be
changes again.
stable for, but that's not something that is.
Every 5 years we used
So
to?
the last time the mortality tables were updated was the year 2000.
Yeah.
So it's not very.
So it's, yeah.
And this was actually the first time ever that public sector specific mortality tables were developed. And then there are subcategories within that. So for example, public safety subcategories, et cetera. So that is new. And what was very interesting, our actuaries have shared with us, is that they found that public sector employees are actually living longer. So that is part of where we're seeing, the updated mortality table cost. When we did consult with our actuaries, they said that, certainly this is something that doesn't need to be tackled all in 1 year. They suggested if we were to tackle something first, that they actually recommended tackling the mortality table assumption prior to interest rate assumption. But that if we wanted to also tackle the interest rate assumption at the same time, we could gradually work our way down. What I think that this table is helpful in illustrating is, how we could phase this in potentially over a number of years to help smooth the mill rate, to help, minimize the impact to the taxpayer, still achieving our end result and getting where we want to get. But since we are not in a crisis, situation with our pension tables, our pension funds, we're pretty well funded. We're not obviously in the position where we're missing, pension payments or anything of that nature, that, we could do this gradually over, say, 2, 3, or even 4 years, phasing it in to sort of smooth these interest rate assumptions, the mortality table assumptions, because if we do it in 1 year, right, we're faced with over $1 million impact to the budget if we tackle it all at once. So just, again, policy discussion and consideration.
So one of the things I look at the mill rate, the grand list growth, and this is our highest grand list growth projected ever, past looking and forward looking for the decade before and the decade. So if ever there's a time to do it, it's now. Looking what happened in the market these last 2 weeks and what is likely to happen and be sustained, we're predicting recession, if not worse. I don't know how. We've made a promise. We should keep the promise. I've asked Amy that I think she's getting tired of me asking every time, what is our actuary recommending at 6.5? We made a promise that's a very expensive promise. Your board made the decision not to close pensions for unaffiliated. So you made the promise. So let's keep the promise. And it is an expensive promise. It's a promise you've found value in, and I'm not criticizing you for it. You chose that, but you chose an expensive promise, and we should be presenting to the public the true cost of what was promised. And I am very strong union support, and I don't want to ever be in the position that the state was in, where they made the promise and then didn't fund the promise. And I think Derek, just made the point, 6.5 is probably too high at this point. So to not do that, that's where my concern is. I would do it this year when we have good grand list growth. this is the time to do it.
Don't disagree with Lisa. How many millions would we need to transfer to fulfill the promise right now?
How many millions? So,
I mean, again, Lisa, I understand where you're coming from, but you're only telling part of the story.
Well, the ARC,
What-
the annual.
Right, we're not solving the unfunded liability here, and it's disingenuous not to talk about that as well. If you're interested in 100% funding, then your board needs to move money out of reserves into the plan.
No, I'm interested in realistic funding of ARC. We have a policy.
But saying we're not gonna make the promise, Lisa, is, again, you're not telling the whole story.
Well, yeah, that's what the state did. I get that, got it. But we have an assumption that we're gonna pay this over, I think it's a 20-year period, at a certain investment assumption. Our actuary is recommending the investment assumption to fund it less than that. To me, this is the time to do it. It was an expensive promise made. It should be kept.
And your board should vote on that and decide whether you wanna do it this year or not, because it impacts both boards.
Can I ask a quick question? Where is the state right now in terms of its discount rate on unfunded?
7%.
Yeah, they're not who you want them
Oh,
on.
okay. No,
thought they came down.
I was worried that ours was actually going to be higher than the state. I thought I had heard it maybe it had gone to 6.5, but not that that's the gold standard by any means, to Lisa's point. But I would definitely make sure that we were below the state, for sure.
Agreed. Yeah, nobody in this room is debating the 6.5. It's just a question of when and how do we get there. But for your board to decide.
And the 6.5 really created a jump in the impact to the taxpayer. That was kind of why.
We talked about this last year when we were at 7 and we wanted to go to 6.5, and we decided to do it in 2 steps. Now we're getting, your suggestions go to 2 more steps, and then, so we'll get to the decision on that probably here shortly and move on. Okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
And I think that's a reasonable position. I'm going to turn things over to Sean to walk through the capital. You're not off the hook. You got to show off those that suit.
Do you guys want to talk about capital?
And the socks to match. I'm truly impressed.
put your jacket on.
I want to start with the taxpayers. All right. So, this is the fun part where I get to talk about the capital. We've got. You have a question, Derek? Sorry.
No, not at all.
Oh, okay,
Wow,
sorry.
that's really amplified there.
I'm closer to the microphone now. First and foremost, our number one priority, and the chief talked about it earlier, is the radio system upgrade replacement. You'll remember that this has been on our capital plan for a number of years. This board was kind enough to fund the previous studies to do the research to properly implement this. To the hard work that the chief articulated earlier, the lieutenant and Melissa Appleby saved us over $1 million on this project by partnering with the fire district. We had originally had, I believe, $2.5 million in the placeholder line items for this, so we were able to come in significantly cheaper with this. And again, to the hard work of staff to do that. This is something that is required. Again, we've all talked about and had a discussion. This will, we believe, and part of the study was to fill in the gaps with some of our trouble spots. Our topography is not exactly friendly to radio systems. And again, the police department does a great job with coverage, but they are working in challenging situations in certain portions of the town, and we believe that this new system will help close those gaps. And it allows the town, public works, fire, everybody, EMS to stay on the same system, which increases communication. Open space acquisition. At this point, and I know it's probably frustrating, we can't go into full details because we need to bring it forward at the Board of Selectmen level. It has only been talked about at the executive session, but there is a substantial opportunity for a substantial partnership with state, federal, local, et cetera, here on a substantial parcel that is very interesting, I think, to the community.
So I'd like to interrupt at this point and just say, I know as much about this project as what you just said. And seems impossible to me to believe we will be in a position to include this in our referral of your budget to the town for a public hearing in time to do all the things we need to do. So I would respectfully ask that you guys consider deferring this decision for a referendum in November alongside the presidential election.
We'll review and look at that, and that's certainly a possibility. But if this were to get terminated, then, or in any way taken off, then, I mean, these deals are of timing, as you know. So,
I understand that, but I also understand that, you know, we have a job, disclosure, a fiduciary responsibility.
and we intend to disclose. We are not the ones attempting to withhold this information. There are other parties involved that have asked us to disclose it in a proper manner.
I'm just looking at the timeline and think
Yep,
that that's
understood.
a reasonable request.
And I would just pile on here and say, I wouldn't even send it to referendum. I mean, in this environment, even if it weren't the middle of COVID, and I do have a good sense of what you're proposing, why we want to take something off of the rolls when we desperately need growth in our grand list, why we want to add open space for Tom Taberski's unit to take care of when he's down staff. We have a huge amount of open space in this town already.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoy it. I'm not saying I am against open space, but we have a tremendous asset already in open space in this town. And I can tell you from years of going door to door, people were like up to here with the millions upon millions this town has spent on open space. I don't think there's a huge appetite out there for more open space, even if there are outside parties that are willing to throw money into it. And knowing basically what I know, that what this parcel is, it's been sitting empty for years. The private sector is not interested in buying it. If we don't buy it, it's not like there's a huge, demand out there to rush out and start occupying that open space. So
Hear what you're saying, Linda, but remember, our board is the one that decides whether the deals make sense. Your board decides whether if we should fund them or not. So when it's
So
time to
I'm
ask for
just
the
giving you
funding,
my
we'll
heads
get
up.
to the funding side. The highway pavement management, go ahead.
I agree with Linda. Without any information, it seems like everybody seems to know the project, or the land parcel, but nobody's talking about it. I would have to know much more information. So I would say at best a referendum in November.
Yep, not looking for a decision tonight, just keeping the project up on the chart. Highway pavement management, as we've talked about in the past, it takes roughly $1.6 million to improve the roads. Tom Roy and his team have done a phenomenal job over the last decade improving the roads. They've gotten them to a point where they've switched to maintenance. We've all heard that presentation. It's beautiful. It's lovely. It's roughly $1.2 million. Again, I throw out the road and drainage as part of operating, but understand that that means it's the culverts, it's the stuff, so we would potentially impact the paving program. So again, it's not people, but it is the quality of roads, et cetera. So that's why we didn't just make an easy cut, because it's not one. But this is the capital side of the road and pavement management, and it's essentially half. You'll see later where the rest of the funding sources are come. Hotly debated item that we've all talked about here in this room many, many times. We feel like we've gotten the pavement where everybody wants it at this point, but I'm sure I'll find out in a little bit. We're getting there. Again, so those are the three bond requested capital projects. You'll note that the bleachers and press box is not there. That did not survive the Board of Selectmen vote. Therefore, it is not here this evening.
Did you get any response from the Board of Ed on that decision?
I have not.
Has anyone?
Has anyone?
Nothing formal. no.
Public feedback, that's not, but
Are
that's
they
public.
aware? Okay.
Yes.
And what was the public feedback to you?
To me, it was quite unfavorable, but,
Unfavorable?
yeah. I mean, those are from people that believe in the need
They
for
go
it,
to football
so.
games.
Go to football.
And, but Rob,
I know.
there's more than just football.
No, I know.
No, but that's, so you asked, that's
Yeah, I watched.
anecdotally.
I listen.
Yeah.
I understand.
I think I have an understanding that I think we're going to need to fund a new set of bleachers in the next few years. There were just some questions I had around private funding that could be explored to defray the cost, and among other things.
And one of the things, obviously, that's lurking out there for all capital is the facilities master plan for the Board of Ed in the town. So it's hard to go all in on these projects without weighing them against the other needs of the town. And I think for me, that's sort of weighing on the open space. If we go all in on 2 million, what 2 million on your capital plan are you not going to do? It's not 2 million and your capital plan. So it's just, it's hard to weigh the priorities without having the analysis. So that's one of the things I'll be sort of thinking about as this process moves forward.
Probably not gonna fly with you guys, but we did save $1.3 million on the radio. So we are lowering the capital.
Mention that.
I did see that. I did
Again,
see
if we
that.
get our hands slapped when we go up, we should get
No,
a
you
round of applause when it goes down. It's rare we get to stand up here and say something's gonna cost less. All right, on the general fund projects, so again, these are where, and I believe, Amy, there's a memo on when we say general fund, where all the funding sources are, so we can get into that later, but I'll just run through the projects quickly. The Public Works Facility paving and storm drainage, this is the Public Works Facility out at the town garage. Dire need to do that. I mean, from what I understand, the temporary aggregate that was laid down when they did that is still the pavement down there, and that's a substantial challenge. So this is something that needs to get done. Sidewalk reconstruction is something that the Board of Selectmen took as a priority in the past, and we intend to fund going forward as we changed the ordinance and took over the maintenance of sidewalks in this community. We believe that it's part of our travel system, our trails, our roads, everything else. It's an obligation. And this is the $200,000 that we've discussed funding. The capital reserve contribution, something that we've had long and thoughtful discussions about, again, asking for $50,000 to go in there. And then the district network infrastructure, the Board of Ed articulated that. That's been part of their continued plan to maintain their servers and their connectivity. And again, not something that the town is part of. We have our separate network infrastructure. And as we talked about the other night, the town's not going to come in with the same request for the same exact thing. Our needs are different in this space.
So there's also a plow truck?
We're getting there.
Oh.
That's CNR. That's on the next
Oh,
page.
sorry.
We got
No,
pages.
it's on the,
We got
it's
lots of
on the,
stuff.
it's on the capital plan.
Yep.
Yeah. It's not CNR.
Is that funded by TAR?
Yeah, but still.
Yeah, he's doing this by source of funds.
Oh, all right.
There's the
And
next slide.
Maria has something on
Yeah, just on
sidewalks.
the sidewalk reconstruction, so just, you may recall, but last year we were very fortunate and we had our sidewalk and ramp analysis completed, so we have a very good sort of quantitative number in terms of what it's going to cost to not only rehab our sidewalks, but also our ramps, and to bring, it's over 300 ramps, and to bring them into ADA compliance over time. Initially, we had proposed doing that last year in a 15-year period, but again, because of budgetary constraints, we stretched it out to 20, so this would be the third year of the 20-year plan of funding, and we had determined that about $200,000 a year annually could do it over a 20-year period, and that at that point in time, everything would have been rehabbed, the ramps would be fully into ADA compliance at that point.
So I was the one who actually introduced the sidewalk policy with Tom Roy. So
Much to my
I
consternation.
know, Maria's still mad at me about that. But at the time we did introduce it, there was so much reconstruction, actually a total rebuild that needed to be done. The initial funding source was a bond of 1.2 million, I believe it was. And so I'm just sort of weighing, new open space, or we could really take care of the sidewalk. So those are sort of the things you weigh against each other. Something we've already committed to or something new, that's another thing. Again, very difficult to have this conversation without knowing what it is. Theoretically, we could approve your budget tonight, and if we had to, we obviously could not meet our fiduciary duty and forward the open space with zero information on it. So, but we do know that sidewalks are in need, and that 2 million could easily be funded towards sidewalks, and we could take care of a known priority of the Board of Selectmen. So those are the things I sort of,
Struggle with.
yes.
Quick question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, in terms of the radio, can you just go into just a little bit on what specific communications are being made there? Is it more of in case all other types of communication go down, it's kind of a basic system for more like security needs, or can you just speak to that?
Yeah, so this is the core police radio safety system. This.
Oh, it's for the police.
Correct. It is past its useful life at this point. We instituted, I believe, 2 levels of study to replace this. We looked at sharing it with Avon. I think we had a presentation a year ago on this topic. Lieutenant Sifo and Melissa did a great job with that. So this is something that it candidly has to be done, Derek, in terms of keeping the police radios functioning online, brought into the 21st century. It's something we need to do every roughly 15 to 20 years, I believe, is what the life on this system is.
Is that like the antennas or towers kind of behind, on the ridge there behind?
Yep.
I believe okay.
It is, and again, Melissa and Sifo were able to save us roughly $1.3 million plus by partnering with the fire district versus the town doing this by themselves and regenerating basically the same thing the fire department has. So we get to hang our stuff on their towers, basically.
And also, so it's again critical infrastructure for police, but our public works radio system functions off of this system. The ambulance company uses this system, as does the Board of Education for their bus transportation network. So while its core is for police, we have a number of other really important radio systems in town that rely and operate off of this. So it's comprehensive for all of those purposes.
Great point, thank you.
Great, thank you.
Welcome.
Down arrow.
Didn't want to touch this. So Linda, to your good question, yes, there's a plow truck in there. There's also the other, some more portion, not all of the paving management, coming out of the LoSiP account and the town aid road account.
LoSiP again?
Amy?
Local capital improvements.
Thank you.
It's funded by the state.
It's about $154,000 a year.
And then town aid road, which I believe is what the governor is talking about releasing.
Yes.
That's $360 about a year.
So, again, what we try to do is buy this stuff out of the proper account and minimize the impact to the general fund or to bonds, et cetera. And use all the levers we have available to us. Again, these are recommendations. Obviously, your board has the ultimate say on which one, but we try to make it easy and tee up. These are our capital needs. These are the 25 items we need. This is how we propose to pay for it. This is how it fits into the bigger conversation. And then you folks go to work on the mill rate.
Maria, a question for you. You had in pavement management, a portion of it was being paid for by TAR. Is that this truck?
So the truck, as well as additional funds coming out of Town Aid Road for paving.
And what is that for? Just materials?
For paving, it's, right, materials, or if we hire a contractor to pave the roads, it would be for the pavement management program.
So that is a little bit of shift. So when we talk about capital being starved, we've always used TAR to purchase equipment. So to use it for pavement is, in a degree, it's starving capital. It's taking that away from the purchase of small capital. So that, I just want to.
Could you think alternatively that's an operating expense?
Pavement management has traditionally been funded either through bonding or operating, correct? And so putting it in TAR is relatively new since you've been here. It hasn't been, it has only been used, in the past, we had used TAR as really a base capital fund for public works, and it only funded vehicles and equipment. And that's the way we manage, in some ways, we manage small capital that way for public works, because they always have a big need. So it was always $360 a year they would spend on vehicles. So now we're taking some of that out, and that's about how much out for pavement management? What's the dollar number?
I believe we did 243. And again, we have taken a really close look. So Town Aid Road, it is, we are limited in what we are supposed to spend those funds on. So certain equipment purchases, we could take from Town Aid Road. Others that support public works, we would not be able to use Town Aid Road for. Paving, we can use Town Aid Road for. Salt purchases, generally, we can use Town Aid Road for. But again, I think we've been trying to be very careful about which equipment or trucks we would take out of Town Aid Road to make sure that we're really spending that money with what it's allowable for.
Yes, I think we've always done that. I just want to give credit to Mr. Roy. I don't think he's abused that fund.
No, I wouldn't want to imply that, but again, I think we've just been really trying to be very careful about what we're spending.
You mentioned salt and tar. Are you funding salt out of?
No, but that's an example of an allowable expense.
Yes. So, but just my point is, when we say capital is being squeezed, you've taken away one of the levers for capital by doing that there. And I know you want to use other levers, but it's a shift in the levers of capital.
Capital equipment, but paving
Yes.
is also capital, so.
We'll get to that in a minute.
Operating transfers, the highway pavement management, so again, the final chunk of the 1.2 million needed to maintain the roads would be coming out of an operating transfer. Sewer use fund, the second.
What does that mean? What's an operating transfer? That's money from where to where?
It's in the Public Works operating budget in the general fund.
All right.
The sewer use fund, the secondary clarifier covers, from what I understood from the presentation, we have a sunlight challenge down there. The water is so clean and our plant is operating so well that they actually need covers so that algae does not.
And coral.
The coral does, freshwater coral is growing in there, which can muck up our systems and cause additional breakage, damage, et cetera. This comes out of the sewer use fund, but it is something that they need to continue to maintain the high quality water that's getting put back in the river there. And again, we believe that it's going to preserve the equipment that we're investing in there as well. The capital fund, so the fund that, again, we talked about putting 50 in, we debated and discussed.
I don't think that's correct. Amy, could you clarify that one?
Yeah, sure. So we had a Greenway Improvements Special Revenue Fund that included a grant from the state to be used for Greenway improvements. So there was funding left over from that. It's presumed that this was a reimbursement grant, so whatever the money was spent on, it's already spent and gone. It just wasn't coded properly accounting-wise. But just to make sure that we are within the guidance of the Greenway improvements requirements, I wasn't comfortable moving it out for a general fund purpose, so we're just going to use it for its intended purpose of Greenway improvements in case there was some issue with the accounting that we just don't know about, because it was back to 2012, I believe.
And you're running it through the
15.
capital fund.
Right. Yep.
So can you talk a little bit about what Greenway improvements
Yeah.
these are? Because in last year's budget, there was $600,000 in the CIP for this year
Yep.
for the Greenway to go from Route 10 to Terrafil, I believe. And so I'm
I
just,
think we took care of, Tom Roy's team did the north end of town. This, I believe, is focusing on the south end.
so this is repaving.
Well, some of it is, if you'll recall, there's root intrusion, I believe is the word
Right,
Mr.
yep,
Roy uses. So
yep,
it's, you can see the white lines on the,
Bump.
so they have to do that and they have to mitigate the trees, et cetera. They did lay gravel along the southern route. There's a substantial portion of fencing to keep folks from falling in culverts and falling off the trail that is part of this that needs to be reconstructed as a regular user of the
Okay.
south end of
So
the trail.
this isn't anything to do with getting it extended to Terrafil?
Correct,
it's
right,
not.
right. So there's, yeah.
Yeah, this is the
there's
maintenance
two
of the
buckets, yeah.
existing trail that we have going to the south end of town. Quite honestly, this
Needs it quite a bit.
should be more, but
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
balancing the whole thing. Now we're going to have some general fund, CNR projects. So,
But before you go there, can I ask one other question? The town facilities master plan implementation, that's scheduled for next year, not the year we're talking about. Can you explain what that is? Because I know I mentioned this to you the other day, we didn't get to finish our conversation. I'm just concerned that I want to make sure we have a town master plan as soon as possible, because we can't prioritize, and you guys on the Board of Selectmen, Board of Ed and Board of Selectmen projects without, they've got this enormous plan. You need to know what yours is as well.
Right, so, right. And so we, again, do not at this point in time have a good quantifiable number for what those building needs are going to be, because the study hasn't been completed, or conducted, excuse me. But again, we didn't want it to be a surprise to you all. We know that there are going to be needs, but we don't yet know what those needs are. So really, we wanted to put a placeholder in the budget for out years to say, there's certainly, just like with the parks and open space master plan, there are recommendations coming. We're starting to learn what those are. We'll have, a plan to inform us regarding our buildings, but we don't yet know what that plan exactly is going to look like. So our thought was at least put a couple of placeholders in the budget. We can start thinking about it. It may be more than that, but just again to get folks thinking about it, that it will be coming.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
When will that plan be done?
Sure. So we are hoping to tackle that this year. We've been working with the firm that the Board of Ed has been working on a potential proposal to do that work. We think that there would be a lot of value in being able to work with, the same firm. So when we're comparing, buildings, and it's really more of an apples to apples comparison, and sort of having the same, again, evaluation criteria set of eyes that's looking at our buildings, that we really felt like there could be some real value in having the same firm do that work.
Thank you.
Lots of different types of projects here. Some IT, some study, reval, trees, which I'm sure everybody's going to want to talk about, and then actual trucks, et cetera. So we'll go through it. Again, stop me anytime. The compensation and classification study. This is a comprehensive study of all of our positions on the town side. It's something that we've been doing on an ad hoc basis as long as I've been around. I know, Lisa, you and I on personnel did a number of these, and we did them as the position would retire or as the need changes. This is to propose to basically have somebody come in and do the whole thing for us, do all the comparative analysis, all the salary ranges, benefit study, to make sure that we're not just looking at compensation from a salary standpoint, but all into that number we looked at
I
earlier.
do want clarification, because I got a different information from Maria, who said that the benefit may not be looked at.
Right, if funding permits, it would be great to have sort of the benefits
That was our
piece,
intent when we talked about it.
worked into it.
That was our intent.
Yeah, a really big part of this is, so in our world, right, normally we would have an organization-wide classification and compensation study about once every 10 to 15 years. A big part of that are job descriptions. So right now our job descriptions in many cases are decades old. So part of it is trying to update all of our job descriptions. Another part of it is to have again, a quantifiable scoring system that we can use in assigning, if you think of almost like points to positions. So really taking a look at things like scope of the position, level of responsibility, technical requirements, educational requirements. So typically you would have a scoring system for positions that assigns a value to them based on a lot of those types of factors. We currently do not have a system like that in place, which makes it really challenging when we do get a classification, a new classification or reclassification request. So again, it's something that as an organization, my understanding is we've never had, but it is fairly common, and it makes, I think, our job a little harder by not having that, and can create equity issues, particularly amongst internal positions in the organization. So part of that then also is looking at compensation, so compensation in terms of salary, and typically what you then do is once you have that quantifiable scoring system, is you're going to then also look at internal position equity as well as external comparable positions for market data. And then typically, through that scoring system, you arrive at pay grades for each classification. We may find that some of our salary ranges for positions are right on target. We may find in some cases we're too low, and in some cases too high, which at that point typically leads to what we call red circling of positions. And so again, part of that, I would really hope that we could also get that high level benefits piece as well. So just a sense of, our DB, DC plans being offered, what are we looking at for health insurance? So hopefully we would be able to do that as part of the
Yes, I
study.
will not support this unless you do that, because obviously salaries in non-pension towns tend to be higher because they get a lesser, as we see the value of the benefit, you're gonna get your pension, even though the market just tanked, and the reason you're getting the pension is because people who lost everything in their defined contribution are going to be paying for it. So that's a tremendous value. So salaries in pension towns tend to be lower. Also, unions generally, at times, not always, will say, I really want this benefit, and I will forego the higher salary to get this benefit. So if you don't look at the total compensation package, you're not comparing apples to apples. And I'm concerned if you just look at salary, you may find that your salary is lower than someone in a non-pension town and go, oh my gosh, I'm being underpaid. But if you looked at the total compensation package, you might find, oh my goodness, you're being way overpaid. So I can't support this unless it's a total comprehensive look.
Sure.
So I suspect you're going to send this whole thing back to us, Lisa, and I agree with you. I voted for this with the intention of this compensation, meaning compensation in its entirety, and I would not approve an RFP that didn't include that. So if this ends up not having that, then you won't see it back from my vote. So when you send this back to us, we'll talk about that.
Can I just ask, and you may have said, but I missed it, what's the end game here, other than all of these job descriptions are old, and I understand we need to update them, but
The update, the end game is, right now, we're spending a substantial amount of staff time on an ad hoc basis, running around as these positions open. We're getting everything lined up. As we go to recruiting, we're in a better position to compete, and we're relying on imperfect data based on what we can pull on websites to make salary ranges. We're doing the best we can, but this is to offer a more professional
yeah, so just
slant to it.
indulge me for just a minute. How many employees do we have? What's our employee turnover, total number for the town? Total number, and so this is.
145.
So, yes, our FTE count is around, for our regular positions or classified services, around 170. But we do have, in many cases, multiple people within the same classification. So the focus is on classification. So for example, our truck driver position, we may have 5 people in that classification. So we're looking at the classification. And again, not to get too far into the weeds, but, as part of the analysis, we'll be looking at things, when we're really getting into salary analysis. Some places it's a 35-hour work week, some places it's a 37, other towns it might be 40. We're looking at that. People budget differently. So are they budgeting essentially 52 weeks a year, 52.1, 52.2? So I'm getting really into the weeds, but I did classification and compensation work for a long time, and yes, I do like this work, but it's, again, part of, I think, our challenge in terms of even just looking at internal pay equity is we do not have a true classification system to use. So we don't have something, again, that's quantifiable, that when we get a request for a position analysis, that we're not able to really score the positions in terms of those different categories that you would typically look at. And again, I think it's just a good practice for us to really do a comprehensive system like that, probably once every 10 to 15 years. And again, to the best of what we've been able to ascertain as an organization, we've never done that, which is surprising to me. But I think that it's just something that could add real value in terms of, again, having updated job descriptions. Hopefully, if we do have pay inequities within our system, hopefully rectifying that over time. That is something ultimately we would have to do through the collective bargaining process. This is something that most likely the compensation and classification study process would probably take a minimum of 18 months to complete. It's really quite an endeavor. And then from there's the implementation phase, which can sometimes take years as well. So, this is a really a long-term investment in our organization, but this would be the starting point.
And out of that 170, how many people leave their jobs every year? How many new hires, or how many replacement hires do we have?
That's a great question. I could get that number for you. We could pull the.
Is it 20? Is it 50? 5?
No, definitely not that much. And again, it depends on retirements versus resignations. Right now we're kind of going through a wave of, we have a number of employees who are reaching that point in their career. So we've had a lot more retirements than normal.
So, yeah, all right.
So we've had a lot more turnover, I would say, than normal.
Well, to your point, we've been able to manage it as they come up prior to this.
I got that. So this would not result in necessarily reclassifying everyone's current employee salary
Right.
against that rating.
Right.
Would it, or would it?
Right. No, and so what we may find, and again, oftentimes in these studies, you'll find that sometimes your salary ranges are on target, other times they may be too high. And if that's the case, again, there's sort of a term we use of red circling. So negotiating with the union, usually freezing those folks until the pay ranges catch up. And then there's also times where we may find we're too low, and that will, again, we'll be able to sort of work that out. Typically, those changes are negotiated through a collective bargaining process. So again, this is something that is going to take a long time from start to finish. But again, I think it's something that adds a lot of value, and I think that there's a real need for it.
We're not going to come to you with 2% increase next year in salaries because of this. On top of the normal.
That's my experience with fixing pay equity, is the people that are low want to go up, the people that are high don't want to go down.
If we have inequities,
It never
we should
results
fix
in
them.
a reduction in the total.
Right.
No, but we
compensation,
have, to the
ever.
fiduciary responsibility as the leaders of this town, if we are paying somebody out of line, we need to fix that. So we do have a responsibility.
Both ways.
Yes.
Both ways.
Both ways, yes.
Yeah, a lot easier to fix it up than down.
Agreed. But there's that whole liability thing that hangs out there if somebody's underpaid.
Classify the job they have.
Network storage,
The
Buzz project.
In a union environment, yeah.
Anything else?
Yeah, network storage, security, servers.
Important stuff. This is one of the payments that we make annually towards the upcoming 2022 reval. This is, as Amy reminded me, the big one. We did the half one last time, so this is the full walk around. They are looking at ways where we can, I believe, reduce the cost on this one. But right now, that's the 1/5.
Yes.
So the total would be 300,000, obviously. Building department permit software upgrade. Again, a request to get in there and improve the software in this place. We have licensing costs that we need to pay for. Soft body armor partial meaning I believe we are not doing all of the vests. We are only doing the ones.
No, partial funding. So this is the general fund portion, and then the grant is going to pay for the remainder.
You're right. Sorry, there's a lot of, but it's not all the vests. I knew I remembered that from the presentation. So the vests have a shelf life, 5 years. We have to replace them. We replace them. Obviously, we take that very seriously. Somebody asked us, can we send them somewhere else or resell them? No.
That was Chris,
that's
wasn't
not something-
Chris wanted to take one home.
I was gonna leave the name out, but no, we dispose of them properly and in a way that doesn't put anybody in
My wife, the kids much more.
in harm, but you're gonna need two of them probably. Replacement of the APHIS system, this is what the chief mentioned before, that we do need to upgrade our fingerprint system downstairs. It has outlived its useful life. Various drainage improvements, we have a lot of water, a lot of streams, a lot of brooks in this town, right? In our culvert systems.
So is that part of what you were talking about, Sean, when you said if you had to cut somewhere, it'd be roads and drainage?
No, this is capital.
Okay.
So that would make no
Just
change to
checking.
the 6.69.
I do have,
That's the problem with
Yeah.
it is
I do have a
we can
question.
cut things in one place, but it doesn't do anything to the number somewhere else. Sorry.
I have a question for the chief. Some of these are projected from the general fund. Do we have the ability to use the Narcotics Task Force Police DARE program, local law enforcement, block grant, police vehicle, special police duty, or DUI enforcement for some of these expenditures? Any of these?
Those are funds?
Yes, those are funds.
Grants or funds?
Well, the block fund is account for public safety equipment not otherwise budgeted in the public safety operating budget. I don't know if any of those are appropriate for that instead of using general fund. Police special duty fund looks like it has a substantial
So in general, the answer is yes, you could use those funds for most of those. I believe it's really a policy that, what funds are you going to use for those? There is a 5 and 6 year plan for that police duty, private duty fund to help fund a lot of things like the other vests that we carry, the active threat vests, which is the external vest, which stops a very different ammunition and serves a very different purpose. Those also have a shelf life of 5 years. So there's a plan to use that in, I think it's the next second, or 22-23 or 23-24. So there is a plan for
Oh,
that.
so then my apologies, I didn't explain my request. I was actually looking for that when I asked for the budget for those funds, so that I could see what the plan is.
So it's,
So if we could get
it's in the
those, that would be
We
great.
do have anything where, again, any source of revenue, whether it's the police private duty fund, town aid road, the CNR plan that we developed last year and also have in the budget this year, it does show the 6-year plan for the smaller capital needs, and it also shows the proposed funding source in that.
And it
plan.
doesn't show the balance, so that's what I was looking for,
Oh.
budgets of the internal funds, if we could get those, that would just be
Yeah,
helpful.
we did them, I think, for current year and next year, the balances.
Just because we're talking about it, Lisa, you'll see here the 2 patrol supervisor cruisers, 110,000 are being recommended out of the private duty fund, as well as the mobile data terminals of 55,000 out of the private duty.
What, and the police vehicle fund then funds the administrative vehicles?
It does, yes.
And what funds that, the police vehicle
For
fund?
resale.
Ah,
of
that's
patrol
right,
cars.
okay.
So we had a couple real good years when Explorers came out, and we were selling them back around, 10 to 12,000, and now since they are not so much in demand, the return on those is only 4,000 or 5,000, and so it takes several resales to get up to be able to purchase another car for them.
We learned through the budget process that the 70,000, 80,000 miles on the car if you add in the hours that the vehicle's turned on, it's actually, Ford has told us, is the equivalent of 300,000 miles, I believe, Chief?
Yeah, so it's 33 miles for 1 hour, or 1 mile on the car.
So the wear and tear on the odometer is not what the real wear and tear is.
Yeah, so your car that you're trading in at 70 or 75,000, the engine really has 300 some odd thousand hours on it, and
It's never off.
Can I just interrupt here, and I'm going to try to manage the meeting here. I don't want to spend 15 minutes on each one of these. I would ask the Board of Finance, well, let me ask the Board of Selectmen as you present these. What, these represent what percentage of the requests that were made? What was eliminated? What didn't get included? Just generally, I don't want a line item, but I want to get a sense that there's been significant vetting of this list to get down to, of the bigger list to get down to this list.
So we did this discussion where we went 15 minutes on each of these topics at the budget hearing, et cetera, and this all comes down to what we've looked for, Rob, as our professionals have said, here are the capital needs, we vet them, they would make recommendations on how do they get paid for through the various funds. We can all differ of opinion or have a long, very thoughtful discussion on that, but everything we're giving you here is the trimmed down list to what we believe with the funding
So was there any
source.
prioritization done so that if we came back and said, we need to find $50,000 or $100,000 out of this list, that you wouldn't have to go back through the whole process to do that?
No, we can cut to the chase. We asked, the way it was presented to us, is we asked the town manager to go back and look at public safety items and to prioritize those. But again, is it private duty fund or is it general fund, and to look at that. We asked basically for the priority in each department, of the pickup trucks, which one's the top one, which one's the least.
Okay,
So we're prepared to do that if we need to.
So rather than present them one at a time, I'm going to ask, because I know Linda and Lisa, at a minimum, have gone through this list. If you have questions or specific items that you'd like to
I asked a bunch of
challenge
questions
or-
to Amy, who did a wonderful job replying by email, so I've got most of my stuff.
So you're okay?
Yeah.
And
One bottom line question that we both have, which isn't about this year, but specifically, but looking at next year, it's $1 million, well, $1.1 million more than this year. It just.
isn't that always the case?
Heads up.
Pretty much? Because the stuff that didn't get picked this year gets automatically put into next year, along with the stuff that was left over from 3 years ago that was projected to be out 2 years.
We re-rank, we look at what's happened, what's changed, what ice boiler, what machine went down that year. It's an imperfect science, but.
You're right to mention it, but it just seems like that's perpetually where we are.
So,
Right.
can I?
Sure, please.
So I think capital is so confusing, and we do have at least 2 new members here, and Chris, you're relatively new. So I thought it was, Rob asked me to sort of think about the buckets we have for capital, and I ran it by Amy to make sure I wasn't, even though I've been doing this for over a decade, it is still the most complicated thing about budgeting. And when we think about budgeting, there is base capital that has traditionally, and Maria's changing some of that, in the operating budget. And the base capital is capital you use every year. Gotta have it, every year, same thing. And traditionally, base capital has been a plow truck for 180, and that's in the public works line item. Then there's 200,000 in paving, base capital, every year you gotta spend it. 141 in PD cruisers every year, gotta spend it because of the replacement value of the fleet. And then we created something called CNR 416. And that is like a credit card capital. And what that was the base capital, and I always call it the tchotchke capital. It's the little capital. The number's the same, but the items in it change every year. That's the base capital. What Maria is finding is that that number may not be correct any longer. That used to be correct many years ago. And in fact, when I was first selectman, it was even lower because we put the plow truck and the police cruisers in there, so it was even smaller. So we've expanded the capital available to Maria and your board by taking them out. But that's sort of the base capital. And then there are little line items here and there, and like your budget, Tom, and there's a little in technology and a little in the library, so there's little stuff, but those are the base capital. And then you have debt service line capacity. And that's when we pay debt service on the capital we borrowed, and sometimes the debt service comes in lower than our guidance, which is 7%. So instead of having a mortgage rate that fluctuates every year, oh, holiday, we don't have to pay taxes, we try and keep that steady. And when there's capacity there, we use that to fund some of the backup capital. Doesn't happen very often in cash. Then the third is use of reserves from capital, for capital. And that's when, oh, our collection rate came in better than we thought, hooray. We didn't need to use it for pensions, we didn't need to use it for OPEB, we didn't need to use it for the health fund. We have more than we need in reserves. Our reserve target is what? For me, 15%.
10 to 14, actually, by policy.
It depends on who you ask, but assume it's 15. Oh, we've got 17% reserves. That's crazy. Let's not overtax our residents. Let's budget that. And you can either do that as a mid-year transfer, or you can budget it as part of the next fiscal year's budget as a use of reserves. So there are two ways to do that. And then finally, there are smaller special funds for capital. And that includes TAR, Town Aid Road, which is $360,000 a year. That prior to Maria was always used for small vehicle and equipment purchases, period, not for paving materials. The police private duty fund, the Golf Enterprise Fund, the Eno Trust Fund, the Dial-A-Ride Fund, the Police Vehicle Fund, the LoCIP Fund. And there are a few other minor funds. And those, this board has not really taken a hard look at. In terms of priorities of capital, the way, if you think about it, base capital are your priorities. Got to spend it. Don't touch it. Woe to you if you come to us and say, I want to cut this plow truck or these PD cruisers or the 416. Woe to you if you do that. So anything that are in there are traditionally your priorities. Then the debt service capacity. This board has always tried to keep that a steady number so you don't have peaks and valleys. That's sort of the second priority. And then reserves is also in there too. And then the question is, well, okay, we've got all this capital, well, where do they house? And generally, once we pass the budget, and the budget, we start the new year, those then get transferred into the capital fund, out of the line item fund. And the reason why you do that is because if you keep it in the line item fund and you have a terribly rainy season and you don't get all the paving done, at the end of the fiscal year, it has to go back to the general fund. But if you make the transfer into the special capital fund, you can use it year for year. So that's sort of the process of how we do capital. So there are 4 buckets, and the buckets are things. But in terms of priorities, base capital is your priority. Then debt service and reserves, and those are sometimes funding, depending on the needs of the town. And recently, the needs of the town have been, oh, no, we need to shore up the health fund. So that wasn't available for capital, so we did that. One year, we infused the pension because we felt they were low. I'm thinking, guys, we're going to have to infuse the pension in coming years, given what we're seeing. So those are sort of the things. Now, the question we have as a policy, and Maria, at some point, do we increase the base capital, that 416 number, either pre-fund it or just add a line item, spend another $300,000? So those are the grappling. The frustration that I'm sure you're feeling, because I felt it, was the sometimes capital. It's just pray to God it's there, right? And that's not a great way to budget, but that if your base number is right, it's an okay way to budget. If your base number is wrong, that's where you run into problem. So when we are thinking about, can our residents afford this in light of what just happened in the market, in light of the fact that I've talked to many people whose husbands or they themselves are on commission in the service interest, contract employees. I'm on a board, nonprofit, we just closed it. There's not going to be any summer camps for that board. What do you do? You can go to road and drainage and cut the operating budget, because that's where we always cut, or you can look to these sometimes capital items. And so if this board decides that we need to be sensitive in light, or if you decide you need to be sensitive in light of the fact that the world has changed, and maybe it didn't, I think it has, But it has certainly changed for this amount of time, right? We don't know what this amount of time is. Maybe it's 2 weeks, maybe it's 3 weeks, maybe it's 6 months, maybe it's 18 months. It will end sometime, but during this period of uncertainty, do we want to spend the sometimes capital, is sort of how I'm looking at this project. Do we want to invest in the resources we have or take on new investments that are going to have costs? So I'm just putting it out there. I'm being very cautious right now. And I think we need to take a step back, tap the brakes, and relook at the budget you guys presented, because the world changed from when you passed your budget.
Lisa, I think you make some excellent points. I just want to remind this board, though, that capital, as we all know, isn't as simple as you cut it and the number comes down. I believe, and hold me here, we would have to cut over 600,000 of capital before it impacted the mill rate.
So yes and no.
Right.
So some items impact the mill rate more, right? Bonded capital, if you cut that, it doesn't impact a lot because
And
it's spread
reserve
over 10 years.
capital wouldn't either.
Reserve would not, but,
Operating capital would.
and also debt capacity capital. That's where the savings is.
It would, but I would remind you that the one correction I have is your board did change the debt service rate years ago before you were on it. It was prior, it was when you were on my board, and that then caused a tax increase in the subsequent year when the Board of Finance had to go back and increase it. So I wouldn't, either you can move that money into reserves, you can use it for capital needs, which I argue, again, most of these are not nice-to-have items. In fact, I think all of them are not. These are replacement of trucks with 100,000 miles on them. We've already invested in the ice rink, and we need the mechanicals to go along with the investment we already made. These are not fun new toys that we're playing with. And in a lot of cases, we've gotten the advice from town staff that if we don't replace them, the maintenance cost is actually going to go up. So we got to then budget on the operating side for additional maintenance costs.
I'm not
in
saying
the
these
downtime.
aren't needed. I'm just looking at our residents and knowing what they can afford.
I agree with you.
I'm
I'm just
looking at a
saying-
changed world.
I'm just
That's
saying,
all.
you got to be very careful, as you know, that cutting these does not necessarily translate to a direct impact right now on the tax bill.
Well,
The
some
operating,
do.
in a roundabout way, yes. Again,
In
if
a
we took
direct
out the
way.
police cruisers, 141,000, that would drop the Board of Selectmen increase on
As
the
I
operating
just
side.
said, woe to you if you touch
I-
base capital.
But that, exactly, and I'm not suggesting we do it.
That's not what we're talking
Again,
about.
based on the board's advice, we put it in
All
there,
right, so
so.
let us get to that, Sean. I appreciate your input.
So this is, again, Lisa's made some great points, as everyone else. These are the funds where everything's coming out of. Again, are there any other questions on the projects? Again, Mr. Chairman, do you want me to
I
go
don't
through them?
think you
So,
need to go through every
No.
single one.
No.
operating, again, and then.
What else,
the
you have any
funds.
more slides? You have any more slides?
Next steps.
Okay. All right, so before we get to next steps, we need to do some levy calc conversations.
Sure.
And I know you guys did this extensively at your meeting last Wednesday.
Rob, would it be okay if we got a summary of sort of exposure on COVID?
Yes.
revenues?
Yes.
And so that's back to what Eric asked if we wanted to start with that. So this would be a very appropriate time for that.
Start with
Thank
that?
you. Yes,
Yes.
please.
For the levy? All right, so these are super, super preliminary numbers, because obviously we don't know what's gonna happen. I looked at fiscal year 20 now through the end of the year, and then I looked at fiscal year 21 as if a portion of fiscal year 21 would be impacted. I'm hoping this time next year we won't be impacted. So very, very rough numbers, because we don't know what the savings are gonna be. We don't know what revenues we're gonna lose. It's just off the cuff what I know we're gonna lose. We're gonna lose summer program income. We know that the electricity, we're probably gonna save some money, but I have no idea how much right now. Like, these are shots in the dark. So right now, the major fund that would be impacted would be the Parks and Recreation Fund.
Actually, we had some information come out today, the board again, as they're going to end the last day of school on June 15th, so we won't be losing the last 2 weeks of this fiscal year that we thought we'd lose. That decision was made this afternoon,
Assuming you can be.
Right.
assuming we can be open at that point. Good point. Sorry, Amy.
That's okay. It is. So then, worst case scenario, for fiscal year 20, I'm anticipating maybe a $350,000 loss.
350,000.
For
That's
fiscal year
net.
20, for Parks and Rec.
20.
For
That's-
fiscal year 20.
That's revenue, that's not net, right?
Is that
That's
net?
net.
So assuming the savings of no staff for those programs.
Well, it's
and-
not no staff because we still have to pay our full-timers, so it would be
Right,
lifeguards.
but you have a lot of summer staff that come
Right, but that would be fiscal year '21.
in. Okay.
So the summer programs.
Oh, you were talking about this fiscal year?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, through June 30th.
Okay.
Do you want just the bottom line, or do you want me to take you through?
Yeah, bottom line.
Yeah, just,
Bottom
we're
line,
looking for
$1 million.
order of magnitude here,
What?
so, go ahead.
$1 million bottom line, between
How-
the Parks and Rec Fund and the general fund for fiscal year '20 and '21.
$1 million.
$1 million.
And did you include in that calculation, and I hate to say it, but there's gonna be absenteeism likely on the police force, just if the numbers are what they say they are. So that's gonna be overtime, increased expenditure. I don't know if you added that in there.
I didn't. I mean, the estimates are so vague.
Yeah, I know,
that
it's too vague.
A lot of the revenue that I think that we're not gonna get, I was super conservative on, so we're
Perfect.
probably gonna get more than what I think, so it kind of offsets with probably custodial overtime, police overtime, so.
And Health Department, what did they say? What are they anticipating, anything?
So right
Health
now,
district?
I don't know if Melissa wants to add to this, but so for right now, they've only experienced some soft costs with some overtime. So right now, there's nothing that they would need, there's nothing that they're anticipating, but it's, we'll keep you posted as we go.
And the health district, I know we pay for it, but do they just, whatever expenses they have, they divide it across the towns? I mean,
So,
or,
yeah, it's a per capita contribution, but their board would have to go back and increase that contribution, and it would have to come back to us to approve it.
okay, so it's not like the state would chip in for that?
They might.
Don't know, maybe.
For Corona, they might. I mean, I will say, watching Seattle, as everyone knows, both my children are in Seattle, so I've been reading the local news there every day, really 7 times a day. But the biggest expenditure that they're spending in Seattle is on their health district, and it's quite a large number, in the magnitude of 50 to 200,000 a day. So we are much smaller than that, so it won't be anywhere near that, and there may obviously be some state and federal infusions based on what happened there, but.
Sure there will be.
And perhaps it never gets that bad here because everybody's sitting 6 feet away, so maybe we don't become Seattle. But in terms of how this board, as a Board of Finance, wants to prepare for that eventuality and how we weigh the risk of it likely happening is something for us to consider, and how we want to budget for that.
So, I'm sorry, I don't want to get too much into the weeds, but so you're saying this is summer programs, overtime, health department, and other, roughly, just off the top of your
Utility
head?
savings, loss in town clerk revenue,
Probably building fees, some.
a portion of the building permits. Building department, public safety.
Thing we're not anticipating is loss of ECS, but we know that the state revenue, there's a potential tremendous loss of revenue at the state level that may trickle down to us at some point. But
Right.
I don't know that we can plan for that one.
Building rental fees, partial, library fees, things of that nature. Ban what? Not everything.
Not all of them.
We still have some fees.
And then there's the tax collection assumption rate.
Right.
Would this be the year with so many people losing their jobs? Will we see that go down for the first time
Right,
ever?
yeah, this is not the year to increase it, that's for
That's
sure.
for certain.
So a net cost to the town roughly over this period of about $1 million.
Very rough,
Between-
yes,
Between now and June of 2021.
yes. I mean, yeah. The majority of that relates to the Parks and Rec Fund, just because of the nature of it.
Yeah.
Parks and Rec was about 800,000, general fund was about 200,000.
But that's, Parks and Rec is mostly the revenue for those summer programs you're talking about.
Net, though.
It's net. So it's the loss.
So the summer
in-
programs, what you're saying, don't pay for themselves by any stretch of the imagination.
They do, but there's still like the complex that still has to be paid for, no matter if people are going to the swimming pool or the rink or.
I think we're actually saying the opposite, that they're
subsidizing.
Right.
on a contribution to the fixed cost basis, they're positive.
Okay,
Right.
okay, I see what you're
And so
saying.
with-
Yeah,
without,
Yeah.
yeah,
yeah.
they might, I don't know if do they
Yeah.
break even, Tom?
Most of our summer programs on an individual basis break even. What we've been trying to say the last couple of years is it's the cost of our utilities at Simsbury Farms, the administrative costs that are involved, that are being put on the fund are the stressors.
Yeah.
The individual programs themselves with our contractors and our day camps, those make those.
So we're losing the overhead
Yeah, I see.
coverage that they contribute.
So that's.
Well, with that great news, let's,
I spent all day doing the same thing for
yeah,
another board I'm on.
yeah. So.
Worst-case scenarios and.
So I guess I would like to do some, so this is where we are based on the 6 5/8 pension Board of Selectmen referred budget,
Yeah.
approved budget, excuse me. And so just, and Derek and Kevin, if they're still there, I hope you can see this on TV.
You can bring your whole
Best
stuff
you
over.
can.
Yeah,
All right.
I'm still here. I think Kevin had to jump off, but, yeah.
Okay, so you can't see this as we do it, okay. So this would equate then to a mill rate of, just show me where we are, yeah. So 37, so we're at 37.32 now, and the fire stays the same at 1.2. So let's just always talk about the non-fire mill rate, okay, as we go back and forth on this. So that's a 0.44 mils increase or a 1.19, and that's what you put up, Eric, at the beginning on your slide, okay.
If I could just interject for 1 second, I would just, as we get into the weeds here, if people could just be a little conscious of speaking into the microphone, because the audio is really tough to decipher. I'm getting most of it, but really have to fill in some gaps.
You got it. Is that a little better?
Thank you.
All right. Okay, so let's try to do this incrementally and come back to, so this is where we play the levers we have. So the first move would be to go to a 6.5 pension rate. What's that?
Yeah,
Oh, no.
yeah, she's amazing.
She is
awesome.
amazing.
Well, now I feel so much pressure if I mess something up.
While we're working, we talked earlier about, the $1 million to get to the 6.5. Is that from its proposed 6 5/8, or is that from 6.75 to 6.5?
We're going to find out. I think it was from 6.75 all the way down to 6.
Yeah, it was from what it is current fiscal year
So
to,
so the budget we're working off of was halfway in between.
yes.
So to cut to the chase, if they're asking for it, if it's important enough to us, then it would be a
An additional
$500,000 hit on our side.
Yes, and so now we're going to, that's what she's,
Reserves.
well, not reserves or mill rate, one or the other.
Yeah, no, I know, it pains me, but
Also,
Well, we're not done yet.
while Amy's working there, a change in topic slightly. When the Board of Ed came in, we also, it was a different world. Just what Eric was saying, when he prepared this presentation, it was a different world, and that was just a couple days ago. Should we be looking back at, we're like putting these guys through a lot more detailed, raking them through the coals than we did through the Board of Ed budget. I'm not saying that, I thought the Board of Ed did a very good job, but it's a new world, and should we be looking a little bit there as well?
But that's a fair question. We will have,
Because we also,
we will most likely have another chance.
when you did your COVID impact study, did you also factor in Board of Ed impact?
That would be helpful. I assume we're going to have another meeting after
I
this.
think so, so
Yes.
If we
that's,
could request that of the Board of Ed,
Yeah.
that would be helpful.
yeah. All right, so now we're at a net expenditure increase of 3.4. and a mill rate to make that work of, so that didn't move it very much.
Correct.
Right, because they
Okay.
were already at 6,625,
All
so
right.
the updated mortality tables was
Okay.
the major hit.
And humor me, and so we're using our 98.5% collection rate,
Yes.
and the resulting fund balance is what percent at June 21?
So, which scenario do you want to use? Do you want to use assuming that we have an increase to fund balance based on our real collection rate?
I missed that, what did you say?
So we're assuming a collection rate of 98.5. If we are assuming at the end of fiscal year 21 that we are actually at 99.5, it's 16.23.
Yeah.
If we're assuming it's at 98.5, it's
We'd be at
14.99.
15. Assume that we collect what we use as the model, the 14.99.
Okay.
All
I
right?
think absent COVID, I would use the other one
Yeah.
because of what's going on.
Okay. So 1.3% mill rating or tax increase for the taxpayers.
So can I just
And-
interject something, Bill?
Sure.
I know we're all worried about the COVID impact, but I think we also need to look back in 2008, when we had a huge downturn, people were losing their homes, losing their jobs. Our collection rate never went down that much.
Right.
So I just want to calm things a little bit, a little bit.
appropriate.
The bank stepped in and paid. Right? The
We
bank-
don't know what the ultimate impact here is, way too early to say,
Right.
but that particular financial crisis had a lot to do with real estate and
Yes.
foreclosures.
Right.
So,
I mean, I think it's prudent to not change it this year, but I.
well, I would, so we
I wouldn't be
should,
overly frantic that
Yeah.
we're not going to have.
we could look at it both ways.
Any
but-
surplus.
All right, so,
I'm sorry, Derek, I didn't put my microphone.
Yeah,
Did you hear all of that?
maybe I would ask Lisa to do some of the things that we talked about earlier today, like the bonding, moving some of the capital around to bonding, and see how much that moves the needle. All right, that's what this process is about.
And of course, I didn't bring my sheet.
I did.
You did.
The
Can I
things
ask a
that-
question while you're looking at your stuff? 'Cause,
Yeah.
Linda, your question was either, I didn't hear your question right, but your question before about the impact and asking staff, I just want to make sure, because your question's either huge or it's somewhat small. So were you asking, you took time and said, we may need to ask town staff in light of what's happened. Are you saying the impact of COVID, look at their budgets and the impact of COVID, or in light of COVID, we may want to relook at what we're asking for totality in our budget?
I'm not sure which
Well,
question
you
you're
confused me
referring
as well.
to.
You said before, you said.
How long ago?
It's a Board of Ed question.
It was in light of, you said you asked the Board of Ed, but also, do we also need to ask the rest of town what may be, what COVID
And
is?
you.
No, town staff, in their various budget, people who are.
Yeah, no, I was specifically talking about Board of Ed in that question, because Amy's done work
Yeah, so I
for the Board
reviewed
of
the town,
Selectmen
I just
side.
didn't review the Board of Ed because their budget is theirs and I'm not sure if
does
they're
that
allowed
answer
to
your-
keep
You know,
it anymore.
I apologize, I stand corrected. I thought I heard you say, in light of, do we need to relook at the town's budget? more?
No, I was referring to Board of Ed, because that was, they came to us a while ago.
Because I don't want that, because that's going to be monumental. We'll never get done.
Right, no, I know.
One question I have before we go through this analysis, Amy, I think you had told me, but I'll just say it publicly. We had talked about transferring the bond premium that we just got. Is that included in this 14.99%? Does that assume we've done that?
Yes.
Okay, so that's already baked in. So in a real dire emergency, we aren't going to do this till the end of the year. We could put a pause on that. So that's additional money that we would have to get us up to close to 16%. So I do want to Linda's point, we have some flexibility there. Perhaps our collection rates come in okay. We can put the pause button on some other stuff if things take a turn. But a couple of things I think it's worth thinking about is, one, take out the $2,000 the $2 million for the open space for this budget and put it up as a separate item for referendum in November. So that will, again, to Sean's point, taking out 2 million bonded, it doesn't really hit this year, but it's still a recognition of a changed circumstance, and we will have a better opportunity to evaluate whether that's appropriate in November. The second thing to possibly consider, and I'm just going to throw these out there, when I talked about the different buckets that are out there that could change the mill rate, and if we're concerned about our residents being cash-strapped this year, which, let me just say, I thought you guys did a great job with your budget, and absent COVID, you would have probably had my full support, and I might have given you a little bit of a hard time, as I generally do, but I thought it was a very good budget. My thinking on this has changed because the world has changed a little bit. So I would ask you to evaluate, go back and relook at some of the things. And one would be, Amy, did the Board of Selectmen get a copy of what you did with the cash?
Not the Board of Selectmen.
So when we send it back to you, we'll ask Amy to forward to you what she did to us. But there,
Put it up.
like the CNR payback, if you make cuts in there, those don't really save you because it's always 416. That's your base capital. Woe to you if you cut it, right? You need that. So you're not going to cut those. And Amy and Maria did prioritize the items that they felt should go in the CNR. So those have been prioritized for you. Then there are reserves. Question is, and for our board, and I don't know where we are in terms of our comfort level and the reserve level, if we don't want to spend reserves, then the items open to, that I think you should prioritize, so that if the world changes again in a week, we can do some cuts there and save our money. Or I talked to Amy and Rob, one possibility would be to do a mid-year use. Suppose we don't need it right away, can we designate it some way in the fund and then release it if there's an option there? And those would be the comp study, which without the pension evaluation, I'm going to vote against. That's the one thing I'll vote against. But permit software, fingerprint system, drainage, utility van, P&R truck, parking feasibility study, Curtis, and P&R signage. So those are things we might want to say, okay, yeah, we need them, but you should prioritize what you need there. But maybe we designate them, and I'll leave it to Amy to work out the best way to designate it, and with a release mid-year, and maybe that's a two-board vote to do that if we feel we have enough funds to respond to the COVID situation. And then in capital projects, we have general fund, which would hit the mill rate, and those projects are the capital reserve funding. Every year you try the 50,000, you can just cut it out. The public works facility, paving and drainage, big need, consider bonding it. That's $330,000. Interest rates are at 0. They may go into negative. So that's one possibility. It will give you savings immediately. It gives you 9/10 saving of that project down the road. You could do the sidewalks as I suggested. Maybe you just bond a big portion of that and take care of that. That gives you $200,000 or 9/10 savings in the operating budget to reduce that. And then the Board of Education District Network Infrastructure, the full cost of that is $500,000. $130,000 was going to be used from the general fund and $370,000 from reserves. Another option there would be to bond that. Again, the savings is only 9/10 of the 130, not the full 500. But again, with interest rates at 0 or at negative, perhaps this is the year to do a little more bonding. That the caution there is that we know that there's monster is coming from the Board of Ed, and I will ask Amy to show what that chart looks like, and the Barbara Pettigene thing. But those are a few things you could relook at and think about that are not necessarily, because Sean's right, they all need to be done, but the question is timing, and obviously, to the chief's point, public safety is going to come first this year. We're going to spend whatever we need, and so we need to have some flexibility there. And I'm not sure what our board's level is in comfort on reserves, but those are in terms of the things where you can cut. The other thing, Maria, you were going to get us information on savings in overtime in Public Works with the very tepid winter we had, there's an opportunity to use that savings for an equipment purchase if you need it. Do you have that number yet? You were going to get that from Mr.
Yep.
Roy.
Right, so we've been a little busy over the last few days.
Can't
We don't-
imagine why.
Can't imagine, no. And so, no, we don't have an updated number yet. We did the budgetary estimates for current year, obviously in December. And we had a really tough December initially with ice storms in particular that were very costly. We've had a more mild winter since. So if I'm hearing perhaps, is that taking potential operating budget savings from this year to pre-fund some
Buy
public
a
works
truck, is that what
projects?
you're saying?
Yeah, I would just do
Buy
it as a
truck under
mid-year
that line
transfer.
item.
Yeah, I mean, I would do it this year as a transfer. I think you would need
Before
both
June
boards.
30th.
But you've got the savings there, why not? And then that's something you don't have to fund next year.
Yeah.
And any savings you have within your budget this year that you have found, I would recommend that you pre-fund.
As much as
anything.
you can.
Yeah, as much as you can, and think about it that way. The other thing I think we need to think about as a board is what to do with the non-lapsing fund of the Board of Ed.
Yeah, so that brings us around to sort of next steps, and I,
Can I just also say that speaking just for myself, that the other capital project that ought to be relooked at and potentially eliminated is the 2.2 million for open space.
we said that.
Oh, that
We
was the
said
first
I'm
thing
sorry, I
I
didn't
said.
hear
Yeah,
you.
yeah, yeah.
I'm not seeing it up there.
2 million, she didn't say.
Sorry, right?
Let's get it all.
Yeah.
We hear you.
All right. So where I was going to go was sort of back to the timeline slide and your question about the Board of Ed. So here's what I think we as a Board of Finance, I'm going to recommend and see if we have support here on the board, is that we're not in a position tonight to refer this
No.
budget to the town for a public hearing. We would like to be in that position as soon as we can so we can keep that timeline, although I respect the fact we have more time to do this. I go back 3 years ago when
Yes.
the teacher's pension was coming and we waited and waited and waited for clarity from the state, and it was not the right thing to do. I think we try to get our business done. And that's one of the benefits of having the fund balance we have, is that, you know, we're not razor thin, so that we can, if the world really changes, we can react later. So here's what I'd like to recommend that we do. Send this budget back to you guys. You have a meeting on Monday. I would like to have you do that budget with a 6.5 pension. And I guess we really should, I think we've already voted on that like
Yes.
3 times. So I
Right.
think that we're firm
We
saying that.
really mean it.
Yeah, we really, really mean it. Yeah, all right. We would ask you to look at these capital realignments as Lisa has suggested, and with Amy's help, and see where we could get a little bit more punch from that.
Or at least flexibility in case
Yeah.
we need to respond to something
Yeah.
else.
Yeah, and then, although this is not for the Board of Selectmen, it's, Amy, I'd like to communicate that we would like the Board of Ed to do 2 things before we're ready to recommend theirs to the town as well. One, the world's changed. Can you take a hard look at what you've done, and is there anything you could do to cut that back? They had very few net adds to staff. I think they actually, if I recall,
Is
it
it
was
one-
maybe,
a 1.5 ad?
I thought it was at 1.5 negative, but it wasn't, but in any event, is there something they could do in their budget? And then the second thing is, they are recommending using the non-lapsing account to pay for,
The 6.5 pension.
yes, so we'll put the full 6.5 pension in and use the non-lapsing for COVID would be a suggestion that we have.
If they have, if it, I mean, first you have to figure out
It-
what expenses they might
Yeah.
encounter.
It'd be great if
They
they
may have
could
more
balance
savings than
that.
anything.
Pardon?
They-
I think they'd have more savings than anything.
Yeah, I would, that's
Yeah.
my thought too.
So I don't know. That's the interesting
What's that?
thing. They may not actually. I mean, that end up being where more of the expenses fall.
Where, what are you saying?
At the
In
school?
education, if the teachers are still teaching and they have to provide, like they're already providing lunch, which I think is a great thing.
But to far fewer kids, so.
And they also have 7 buildings that are closed.
That's true.
But, yeah, are we saying the same thing? We would suggest any kind of if any, benefit they receive in this year that they should be using.
Some reduction in supplies and utilities and the like.
And so the goal then would be to hold our tentatively, but now permanently scheduled March 24th meeting, same time, same place. That's next Tuesday, with the goal of having your input back so that we could hopefully then refer these to the public hearing.
The only thing I would add to that is, does this board want to, we've never actually voted on the 15% reserves. Do we want to?
Well, I would, so, since we haven't actually done it, I think the time to do that will be next week.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think because we don't have another hour and a half to talk about which assumptions we changed to get to the 15 or 16. Because we've got, I'm being facetious, but that conversation gets long when we talk about whether we use the 99 or the 98, which is better to change. What do we, but we'll do that before we vote to send these to the taxpayers.
And I would just ask Amy to come back with options we have in terms, like what we did with the Hartford when we designated reserves, get your advice as to whether you think that's advisable, whether we can accommodate it in the current reserves,
Exactly.
however.
That's all part of the level of fund balance
Yes.
that we want to have, whether it's general or specific.
Yes,
Right, okay,
precisely.
yeah.
But the other thing we don't know at this point, so I'm not arguing against having reserves, but is what level of federal or state emergency funding will be made available to towns because of their increases in expenditures on this stuff. I mean, they just passed billions of dollars.
I think we
Federal
can
level.
expect some.
I think we can
But there will be a
expect some.
cash flow, right?
Right.
Yes.
So
I
you
think
need
we-
some upfront, but it's not a permanent.
Yes.
So
Cost.
just,
Or as an excuse not to spend in certain places.
yeah. Right.
Precisely.
Okay.
You have a request for unanimous consent or comment? Is that where we are?
I'm just about to get there. Yeah, exactly. All right, I think we owe the Board of Selectmen, as we send it back to them, an indication on some of the issues that we asked questions about, specifically the large dollar issue for the deputy police chief and for Tom's lawnmower gardener. No, I'm being very facetious. I should never do that. It's not fun.
It really is more than that.
Huh?
It is
I- we
quite a
know
bit. We're very
completely.
familiar with it.
Very familiar. So I would be
No,
glad to have.
I wasn't trying to be facetious either, and I apologize if it came across as that, so.
We get you.
You're forgiven.
I got you, Derek.
Yeah, he knows where you live. So let's, I just look for comments about, because we don't want to send them back and then
Right.
come back and,
I think your marching orders for the Board of Selectmen are fine. I don't want to go away with the assumption that the non-lapsing account in the Board of Ed is absolutely going to be held aside for COVID. If.
it's a request.
Let's see the analysis first.
Okay, so have them put in the 6.5 without using the non-lapsing and see where we are with the non-lapsing.
Right.
Okay.
Right, but I.
That's the request.
I mean,
And so-
I'm inclined to say if there are COVID expenses, that it comes out of our reserves, that's what we have reserves for.
I think.
The non-lapsing is a reserve as well, so.
Yeah, but it doesn't count as a reserve when people are looking at it.
So I'm okay with what different buckets. I think flexibility is,
We won't make that decision tonight.
Right.
Let's,
I'm fine with that. That's
the
what
analysis
I
they're gonna
wanted to
do.
hear.
So I just wanted to see from each of the five of us that are still here, how we felt about the
Yeah.
additions to the town manager's recommended budget. I'll go first if you want me to. But I'm in favor of both of them. The deputy police in particular, the smaller ones, take them as a package. I'm supportive of the requests that they're making. Let's just leave it at that. All right?
Yes, I'm in favor of that.
Okay. Lisa's nodding her head, yes.
Well, my hesitancy is just, I want to see what happens in the next week. So
Yeah.
I just think we need to be prepared to change our assumptions and our support if the situation
Yeah.
changes. So that's the only thing my only caution to that. And then I would like to see the Barbara Pettigene debt service.
Mr. Chairman, are we voting on these items, or are we sending them back to the Board of Selectmen
We're
with an
sending it
indication
back.
of what our
Yes.
position is?
The latter.
All right, very
Yeah.
good. I concur with,
Okay.
I
one
concur with
without
your
the-
statement on the first point.
I just think it's not, it's not in the spirit of
No, no, no.
cooperative to,
Can I ask for clarity?
Sure.
So you said you were sort of mixing terminology possibly. So we have your support as was put forth for the chief and the sergeant, or the additional Parks and Rec and the assessor and the library? Which one is that?
all four of the projects that were listed, which includes, so for the police, it's the whole thing. It's the deputy police chief and the sergeant promotion, the 183 and the 5,000. For the Parks and Rec, it's the 96,000. I just thought I was doing pretty well. And the 40,000 for
The assessor.
25 to 20 for the library.
Yeah.
That's why I was asking for
Yeah.
clarity. Okay? We actually didn't initially agree as a board on all of it, so it's important to us.
Well, you could cut it if you want to do it. We're fine with that. Be perfectly fine.
But my support is conditioned on what you do with some of the other suggestions we gave you. So
Yeah.
I'm not a hard support. I want to see what you come back with, and I want
Yeah.
to see how the world has changed.
It's completely, there's not one of us over here that doesn't feel exactly the same way that you do.
So we had Amy put together, and Rob, I want to give a lot of credit to, because it was his concept. When we did this, you can see, thank you for getting this within range. You can see the debt service capacity, the cash for capital under the debt service line this year. Next year, it doesn't exist. So that's the frustration that Maria and I felt, and the prior boards of selectmen. It's always an uncertain number. And so next year, you're going to have to depend on, we had a better collection rate than anticipated, and that might not happen this year. So that's where it gets tricky, and to find some way to stabilize that over time is a long-term goal. I know it's been a mine for years, and I know it's Maria's too. But the interesting thing is we did a quick, what does it look like? And I'm going to turn it over to you for the exciting
Well,
graph.
Oh, yeah, lay this one on me. Barbara Pettigene made this graph the first time. It will always be the Barbara Pettigene
Right.
graph. I don't want the next one to be the
She
Rob
lives in
Pomeroy
Florida now.
graph.
She doesn't
Yes.
even know
She
that
doesn't
we're,
even
like,
know that
he's
we're
been
talking about it.
memorialized for life eternal here.
So I don't want my name associated
Try to
with this
smooth
next one.
this curve too.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
Flatten the curve.
Wait a
Flatten the
minute.
curve.
You'll see.
Nice.
So you want to show the next one?
She's coming, she's bringing it up.
Ooh,
Ouch,
that looks like a
ouch.
tornado.
All right, so the
The winds
concept
are
behind
blowing.
this, and I want to be very clear, this is just a bare ass guess based on information that's out there today, and I think the Board of Ed has not done their capital budget. We don't have an approved plan, we don't even have a recommended plan. But what this looks at is adding major educational project, I won't even call it a particular building, every 5 years for the next 15 years, right? No, more than that. It goes out,
There's
it's
5 schools.
total of 5
Plus-
educational buildings.
Plus Henry James, so.
Yeah,
6.
plus the one that's already built.
Yeah, which they may also
And
change.
bonding for 15 years, it puts a large amount of debt outstanding and puts us above. So what do the lines represent, Amy?
So the blue line is 7%, and then the pink line is 10%, and then the green line is 15%.
And we
And
don't
before
even have the
everybody
Board
has
of
a
Selectmen
complete-
plan
what's
yet.
that?
We don't even have the Board of Selectmen's capital plan.
So there is no Board of Selectmen's facilities capital plan, but I did make some assumptions.
There are some,
Right.
yeah.
So I did do based on like prior years' history. I forget if I went like 3 or 5 years back, but I just put in like 2.5 million each year for miscellaneous town projects. Some years will be less, some years will be more. I kept the greenway improvements in there as cash. I kept the partial bonding for paving, the district network infrastructure that we do every year, and then some miscellaneous high school projects at like $1 million a year. So these are all just assumptions that I just threw out there just because we just don't know yet.
That's sort of baseline stuff, though. I mean,
Right.
and nobody saw this coming from the schools either until that Tectron company went out and found, oh my God, the sky's falling in. And when they do that for you too,
All
they'll
right,
come
so-
in
Yeah.
with similar.
So before we
Similar
send
request.
everybody into apoplexy, you do have to then figure out what this really means in terms of the mill rate, the taxes. There are assumptions here about grand list growth that are realistic, given what we know today. And it assumes that cadence of buildings and a price that may or may not be where we end up at all. But this is the kind of capital budgeting we are anxious as a Board of Finance to do in conjunction with the Board of Ed and the Board of Selectmen, with a clearer vision of the future before we take one little step. I do not subscribe to the one building, one referendum at a time.
Right.
I think
I
that
agree.
is unfair to everyone in town who isn't the first building done, and to the people who support other priorities in town, like senior centers and other things. So
I
this
guess
is what,
people can agree to disagree on that.
what's that?
The kind of prioritizing the need over time, as opposed to throwing in a huge hundreds of millions of dollars at the taxpayers up front and improving something across the board. I think that's been attempted to be done over the, call it 15 or 20 years, longer than I've even been in town. So I would take a small bite and baby steps approach, as opposed to all-in approach. Especially today, I would just frankly, given where the public markets are today, which are effectively frozen up, I would put the entire thing, on pause and monitor kind of as we move forward in light of the longer-term impacts. And I'm not saying multiples of years, but I'm saying at least over the next 12 months or so, the effective impacts of on the economy of the coronavirus.
That's fair enough, Derek, and we really do all respect the work done by the task force, and I think it isn't ready for us to make any conclusions on, because nothing's been decided and nothing's been presented. But we're as anxious to play our role in that process, and that this graph doesn't tell the whole story. It tells a part of the story. The other part of the story are operational efficiencies, as well as what the actual tax impact is on individuals. So
I didn't mean to digress.
No. We look forward to that in real time after the budgets and hopefully as the world starts to move back in a more normal direction. Okay. Derek, did you have anything else to add to, as it relates to the Board of Selectmen budget? Are you okay with what?
Thank you, Rob. Well, I have, maybe not as eloquent as others on the board, but, my hot buttons are pretty consistent with, years past, and those are keeping our mill rate under 40, all in a perfect world, being at 98.5 collection, and also keeping our general or our reserves at least 15%, especially as we go into a potentially tumultuous environment, not knowing what the state is going to provide or not provide or hold back because of the existing conditions or ongoing condition. I would say I'm in the, for the most part, other than for public safety, for the reasons I mentioned earlier, I would not, be in support of any additional adding staff or hiring. Again, I am in support of the chief's recommendations. However, I would just simply ask, are those figures firm, or can they be even negotiated maybe down a little bit? given light of the current situation, but generally am supportive of that. And that's, again, kind of my wish list, if you will, if we can kind of achieve all that at the same time.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
And a comment. My question is, and maybe you can get us an answer to this for next week when we meet, is who makes the decision about whether to send the $2.2 million open space project to referendum?
That's a good question. I think we do.
I think we do too.
Yeah.
But
But we should confirm that.
okay. And secondly, and this is a not for this year, but, you know, last year we talked about potentially changing the assumption on the collection rate, and we got talked into not doing that, which didn't go over very well. And right. And it worked out all right in the end, but I'm just wondering, I mean, that whole discussion last year made me start to wonder, well, why do we back into this thing of saying, well, we really collect at 99.5, but we're going to pretend that we only going to collect at 98.5, so that gives us a percentage point to throw into reserves every year. Why don't we just budget 100% of the revenue, budget that 5% of it won't be collected?
0.5%.
Sorry, 0.5, I meant to say. Budget that if we need to enhance reserves, which we don't need to do every year, that we put that $1 million into the budget. Hey, we want to put make us affirmatively make a choice to put money into reserves when we need it, and when we don't need it, it can be used for capital or other things. But we have this sort of back-end way of doing it
Yeah,
that
so.
I don't really understand why we are tied
It's a
to that.
guaranteed tax increase in the future is my thought on that.
Does that mean, I'm not sure I follow your point, Derek, so it's late, help me.
There's no upside in budgeting for 100% collection. There's no protecting your downside, I should say.
Well,
So,
it accomplishes exactly the same thing.
Yeah, so I really respectfully not want to have this half-hour conversation tonight.
Right, and I totally agree, I just want to
Because
put
one,
it on
I think any
for,
meeting that goes over 2 hours is,
We can-
we
We
become
were
very.
planning on 6.
yeah.
Yeah.
Let's put this on for after the budget is completed, let's have a discussion
Yeah.
about it for future years.
Right. Because there are elements of, overexposing yourself to reserves. There was a concept of a mill rate stabilization fund, which is what our bond council is. So there are 5 or 6 ways to attack this. And
Yeah, it's a complex
it's-
conversation.
it's not for
It's
tonight.
not for now. I wasn't suggesting it
Most
for now.
important thing that we do as a board is what we do quickly after the referendum, setting the mill rate after the budgets are approved. But all the hard work goes in over all of these meetings, and I suspect that we will get very close to that number next Tuesday night, if we can. That's the goal. All right? Unless the world really changes, so, all right?
Right.
Or we get feedback, what?
And it might.
And it could. Or we get feedback at the public hearing. This has happened.
Yeah.
Public hearing that makes us, at the Board of Finance meeting, after the public hearing that same night, look at capital. The Henry James project was a great example of something very, very big and material that happened at that meeting. So
Yeah.
we won't be set until it goes to referendum, and then.
While you're on that, Rob, I would just simply be thoughtful of a possible contingency plan in the case that we think we're going to have a public, a public hearing, and we actually can't.
So we've already, yeah,
phone-
so that was gonna be the last thing I said. It already is a virtual meeting.
Okay.
We're not holding it where people can attend, correct?
It depends on the date of the hearing. At this point in time, we have closed meetings to the public through March 29th. But if we need to extend that out, what we can do is we have the ability to continue to close meetings to the public. They have to be either televised or streamed online in real time. And then basically until the day before, the public can submit their written comments. We're using the town clerk's office as the repository for that. They would submit their written comments through the clerk's office, either through email or snail mail, and then whomever perhaps is chairing the meeting would then read them into the record as part of the public hearing.
So I think we have to also have the capability to take questions from taxpayers at the meeting.
I will double check the executive order. I don't believe it's at the meeting. I believe they would have to submit them in advance of the
No,
meeting.
those aren't questions. Those would be comments. I think you have to be able to take questions at the meeting, no?
I will double check. I don't believe that's part of the executive order, but I will double check that.
But if there is a way for us to do that, we
Yeah.
would certainly, either through Twitter or emailing and checking the emails during the meeting, ideally.
I think that's the best way, is to have somebody monitoring emails and reading questions. I think otherwise you
The
do.
last thing we want is that somebody felt that they didn't have a voice.
Correct.
Right.
And that's
No, we want
because
that.
this is the exact, we
don't.
the exact opposite at this time and point in our society.
We can't open the line up though to.
No, we're not
No,
talking,
but
we're not,
emailing
not
is a
not
good
talking about
effective-
live voice. We're
Yeah.
talking about live
Yeah.
Email, or emails that can be read live by somebody here. That's a good distinction, that very clearly a distinction.
In time, right, so that
Your
we
meeting,
can.
we need to be able to control the
Right.
discussion.
Cell phone number, so like.
Okay,
Yes.
I have one other thing that's not on the agenda, which I just, Derek, you still there? We did,
Yeah, actually, for 1 second, I just, really quickly, I am supportive of using, just to kind of, a little bit further on my comments, I am in favor of using reserves to bring down the discount rate to 6.5. And then I did have as I just saw Chris in the audience there, I did have a question about whether, in your discussion about media content, if these were one-time purchases or subscription-based, as much of media is today, if you could, break that out possibly so we know what's coming back again next year versus just a one-time increase. I know it's only 20,000, but that would be my one question.
Yeah, there's one question I had, Derek, thank you, is that one of the things we need more content around is that, well, no pun intended, we may be moving to buying into streaming-based content as well, which is a whole nother materials-based cost that we haven't even, that Lisa hasn't even forecasted for, because again, it's a completely unknown and changing landscape. So,
Okay, thank you.
so this is off topic of the budget, but Amy and I did have a quick exchange with FIA about potentially rebalancing the pension fund investments. So I just wanted, Derek, you're on the subcommittee. I think we should get that on our agenda for next week and try to have a subcommittee meeting to look at that. So it's not changing our strategy, but taking advantage of the fact that we are very heavily weighted fixed income versus equities today. So.
Rob, I'm sorry, I'm trying to fill it in. Why don't you just connect with me offline? I'm happy to discuss.
All right.
The other thing I just want to add, for everyone to think about, perception matters right now, and I would ask your board to think about whether you want to come in with any mill rate increase at all, and how the public would perceive an increase at a time when they're struggling. So think about.
I think some of us have had that conversation, but I also want us to, we've got this turd sandwich right now with this whole coronavirus thing, and I wish it's not a crutch to put this whole conversation aside as our town stewards, but I almost wished we don't lose sight of actually having an honest debate about why we felt the way we did about our budget, what we presented, the potential increases on the mill rate in light of the grand list growth, and do we save it or not? I think there should be a debate and hold us to task, especially me. Why would I have proposed that in light, exclusive, absent that. And so that isn't a reason why we shouldn't just, because of what we're facing right now, we shouldn't just say, we can't increase the mill rate cost or pass on cost to our taxpayers because of this. I think that's not the right way to look at it, and not the right way to have a conversation of why we were thinking of making the decisions and asks that we're going to be
So
asking
I do
for.
appreciate that you can look at them separately, but I would encourage you to look at it through the lenses of the world has changed, because I think most of our residents are looking at their budgets through the lens of, my God, the world has changed.
Oh, but that would be saying we shouldn't just go back, cut everything out and just come back and put it
No,
forward.
That's not what Lisa's saying.
That's not what I'm saying.
I understand what you're saying, Liz. I think given the guidance you gave us tonight, I think we can come back and look at what the total picture is. I just want to be clear. At this point, this board is not looking for a tax decrease, correct?
That would be our desire.
Correct. Today, you're not necessarily demanding a tax decrease. That may change to next week, but right now, we're not going back for a mill rate cut. We're going back to get closer to zero, if not zero itself.
Correct.
Right?
And we are looking you to make cuts in your budget. I gave you some vehicles to do that.
And you and I will have a spirited debate next week about who's raising the budget, whether your pension change is raising the
Yeah, I
budget or
focus on
mine
the operating
is.
budget, not the mill rate for your purposes.
But, yeah, we'll go back and do our job. I feel like we've got some levers to pull. We'll come in and have a
Okay,
good
one
discussion.
last question before we finally get out of here. Are we all comfortable doing this with all of us in the room next Tuesday night?
We're going to have to
I
see.
think it will depend.
Yeah, as it stands.
Take guidance. If today was next Tuesday, or whatever, I would feel fine
New
with
York,
it, but.
New York City sheltering in place supposedly as of tonight. So that
Yeah,
may
so I
change.
think we need to be thinking about that. And can we run a meeting with only one person here and the camera? So,
Do we have WebEx capabilities or Zoom or other?
no, we're just not up that,
ways of-
we've moved up the curve. We have a speakerphone that works, which is,
Derek, the Board of Finance will want to increase the tech budget.
Yeah.
It's extraneous cost.
all right. So, yeah, we'll be in touch, all right?
Are there any
All right.
questions that you guys have?
All I
before
would
we-
say is, I'm going to continue on as we get out of here, this is a root canal for all of us.
Yeah.
And it's only going to get harder. It's only going to get harder because of the constraints of technology and gathering somehow, which we're understanding. So poor Derek is sitting there without he's out of the room, and I know what it's like to try to participate and have the tangible contact of us as humans. I would think that I'd ask, this is a process, not a person issue I have, it's a process. This part is so, to me, inefficient and very inflexible, because you all aren't participating the many times that we are with the narratives that have occurred prior to this. So tonight you're looking for 20-second snippets and my objective and subjective opinions. And if the Board of Finance was a physical participant in the meetings that we're having earlier, a lot of this would, I feel, have a much more collegial, not this collegial, but it would have a much more effective ultimate.
So we were told we were not permitted to participate in your earlier
can
discussion. So
come
we
to
watched
the-
it we watched on
Yeah.
television.
Right, but I think the being there is a completely different experience.
But it isn't always possible. I wasn't even in the state.
Yeah, I get it, I sacrificed, and this will be the 57th meeting I feel like I've been in this building in the last 10 days.
This is good for us to discuss as we look at this process going forward with the capital plan and the chairman's desire, and this is everybody's desire. How are we looking at this picture as we go forward? Maybe there's some opportunity here to improve this process, so
Yeah, it's not the
it's
painful
less
process.
painful for everybody, and you guys included, because you gotta sit here and listen to us, so.
And the invitation goes both ways. You could attend our meetings as well.
Right, but the narrative is what, I'm
Some
talking
of you.
about being part of the narrative of Tom coming in with this impassioned explanation on Lisa and the chief. That's
So I
all
will
that,
say
because
I
you're
did
asking for
watch-
clarity questions
Yeah,
that
so
are
this
there.
is one of the upsides to where, being sheltered at home. I watched
We watched it.
75% of your Saturday morning all the way up. It was, yeah, it was awesome. Leave it at that.
Scintillating.
And I watched your whole 3-hour meeting,
Yes.
whenever that was. Yeah.
But sometimes I feel like some of the questions being asked, people aren't clearly there, so that's mine.
So yeah, fair enough. I can't leave it alone, Chris, but it cuts both ways.
Yeah.
So if, you guys went on about what we were gonna do, and we did what Sean said we were gonna do about and still we get this, I completely agree with you. It's inefficient to have the chief have to do this 3 times. It's just not, and Tom, the same thing. It's just, so there's gotta be a better way.
Yeah, if we
I'm
have
with you
2
on that.
boards that vote on something versus 1, this process is inefficient in a way.
Well, one of the things, to Linda's point, is fiscal notes would help a lot. Some of the questions we have, if there had been a fiscal note on it or a little more detail in the books, we can get some of that information.
Yeah.
Like background on the chief positions, if that had just been in the book. I
Well, we
mean,
did, we
guys
did
met
talk
for-
about at the
Yeah.
tri-board, having the Board of Finance at the workshop.
You guys met for like 9 hours,
Yeah.
no, like 11 hours total, right?
It was long.
it's a long day.
And-
No, it's only one of the meetings.
I know, but,
Yeah, we've talked about
but
this.
my point is, there's 6 of us here. So let's say it's 11 hours, that's, that's a lot of time across 6 people to sit and watch. I mean, if it can be condensed into notes, when you're talking about efficiency, that's not super efficient either in terms of person hours.
I know, that's, okay.
All right.
It's $100 million. And
It's
doing it
$100 million?
Like this is, it's not, so, I'm off my soapbox.
Looking for a motion to adjourn.
Oh, God, so moved.
Seconded.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Thanks, Derek.
Plus, there's
Thank you, guys.
Ed meetings as well. I mean, I don't have 8